The Rise of Iceland. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination, so don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author, we are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like, and if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 51, Ireland. The sky was gloomy, with a slight rain falling from the sky, and the waves on the sea were larger than before, but fortunately there were no major thunderstorms, so even if the Thor's hammer and the Hope went cautiously, they were still safe. It took several hours to clear up gradually, and then the sun appeared in the sky, and it was midday. Olaf walked out of the cabin with Piku, looked up at the sky, let out a sigh of relief, and turned his head around, only to feel a sense of loss. Suddenly Piku pointed to the continent that appeared in the far north and shouted, "Master! There's land there." "Oh." Olaf turned to look, then turned to the cockpit and shouted, "Big brother! Is Ireland here?" It was Olaf who was sailing today. He heard Olaf's voice and counted the time, and said loudly, "It's almost here." "Is the angle wrong? 50 degrees south of the rudder?" Olaf saw the angle deviation in the blink of an eye, and then shouted after adjusting the rudder. Olaf finally saw the continent in the distance through the window, and he let out a sigh. Finally, it's coming. I should be able to get to Dublin in the afternoon. After spending half a month at sea, Olaf was so bored that he carved a chessboard on the table with a knife a few days ago, and then used the front and back of a copper coin to distinguish the chess pieces, teaching Olaf and Hagrid, Piku, etc. People go bang, played chess to pass the time in the afternoon. The two ships entered the Celtic Sea just south of the island of Ireland. At noon, they had a fresh caught seafood meal. The ships turned north and entered the Strait of St. George, between the island of Great Britain and the island of Ireland. Standing on the deck at this time, you can see scattered fishing boats in the strait fishing, but boats as big as Thor's hammer and Hope are rare because the Irish region is very poor and agricultural planting is the main economic entity. There are few fishermen. Olaf and others saw a bay in the northwest, which is a large port similar to Reykjavik. Then Olaf and Hilter sailed past. "This is Dublin," Hagrid said, pointing to the clearer and clearer port in front of him. "Since England occupied Ireland, it has been unstable here. The Irish are not convinced by the British. Later, they suppressed a few times before they became honest, but here is better. Iceland is still poor. Except for a few large estate owners and old nobles who are rich, there is also the governor of Dublin. The current governor is Carnarvon Stephen, an old noble in England. He has a cousin with the prime minister and serves as the governor of Ireland. It has been 12 years. He is a traditional nobleman, very arrogant and valued money, so it is not difficult to deal with him. Besides, he has always lived in the governor mansion. Before, there were few goods. We usually only deal with his subordinates. When you arrive in Ireland, don't talk to ordinary Irish people. Don't use the term Southerners, because the richest Irish people are Southerners, and they hate this term. Ordinary Irish people are just the lowest ranking people, and our goods are mainly sold to Noble Manor and Governor Stephen in Ireland. You can watch and talk less on the road." Hagrid gave Olaf the things that needed attention little by little, and Olaf also listened attentively. After entering the port, the ship slowly slowed down and docked in the harbor under the command of the port flagman. This port is built with pine wood and is fairly strong, but 5 or 6 large ships have been docked. Sailors are busy carrying goods. It seems that they are basically moving grains on the ships. Only a few salt, sugar and cloth are removed. Seeing Olaf's eyes, Olaf lowered his head and said, "The British agricultural tax in Ireland is very high, and the governor and large farmers have both added 20%. Therefore, it is said that more than 70% of Ireland's annual grain has to be handed in. It is said that many areas in the north people will starve to death every year. These should be the governor and the Irish manor carrying food out of the country." Olaf knew it instantly, and thought to himself, no wonder the Irish rushed to Vinland to become a white slave. They were about to be exploited and squeezed by the British government, colonial governors, and big landlords in their hometown. They stayed at home. "It's also dead, it's better to go out and break in." While Olaf and Olaf were talking, a wooden plank was put on the boat, and then a short red-haired man with a broadsword in his hand took 2 soldiers up, and he turned around and looked at the Hope and Thor's hammer. "I didn't recognize the flag on the ship, but there was the Danish Red Cross flag right next to him, so he raised his eyebrows and looked at Hagrid and the other sailors." "Who is the captain?" "What are you here for?" The English with an Irish accent made Olaf and others frown frequently. They thought it was not as good as the accented Icelandic. Hagrid stepped forward, quietly stuffed the man a few silver shillings, and then explained in English, "We are merchants in Iceland. We come here to sell some Northland specialties. I don't know what the adults call. We used to be the tax officer of Simul. Friends, don't know why he's not here." The red-haired dwarf packed up the small silver coin, and grinned. "Simir drank too much in the winter and froze to death outside. The officer killed all as the newly appointed port tax officer by the governor. You see it all." Honest man, squeezing a self-confident smile at Hagrid, the tax officer Kildall turned his head and said to the guard behind him, "Old crooked mouth, just measure the length of the inner deck of these two ships." Two soldiers took out the scaled ropes and stood on both sides of Hope's deck and straightened the ropes. The oldest soldier with a crooked mouth yelled, 70 feet. After speaking, the two of them went to the Thor's hammer to measure the width of the deck, and shouted, 72 feet and 9 inches. Kildall looked at Hagrid with a smile. "Sir, according to the regulations of the English Parliament, your two ships will have to pay £27 and 18 shillings. After paying the tax, you can stop and do things in Dublin as you like. Welcome to Dublin." In the era of great navigation, the ports of various countries relied on the taxation of merchant ships as income. However, in the developed areas of commerce, exchange personnel were sent to follow the transaction, and about 10% of the transaction tax was collected. However, for the backward areas such as Iceland and Ireland, seagoing trade is conducted under the monopoly of domestic capitalists, and the taxation method is simple and convenient. Hagrid knows that paying taxes like this is taking advantage of it. If it is based on the transaction tax of London, Lisbon, Amsterdam and other major ports, it should be taxed at more than 10% of the transaction volume. He knows that it is not bargaining if it takes advantage of it. The advantage made Kildall calculate a few feet less, which is in his best interest. Happily took out 20 gold coins and more than 40 silver coins from the purse. Hagrid counted them twice before handing them to Kildall. Nowadays, gold and silver currencies are used in a mixed manner. There are many counterfeit coins with extremely low gold and silver content on the market. www.uxiaspit.com. As tax officials, they are all proficient in arithmetic and sensitive to currency. Kildall, I checked them one by one, and then calculated in my heart against the conversion standards of the British pound and the Baltic mark, French écu, etc., and finally put it away, nodded, and said, "Yes, I will charge you an extra shilling, friend. What's your name?" "My name is Hagrid, sir." Hagrid smiled and nodded, and after the two shook hands, Kildall disembarked with the soldiers. Olaf simply calculated the pound sterling, and then he couldn't help but slapped his tongue and said, "They do not collect taxes on the value of the goods, but on the size of the ship. It is too unfair to the merchants who deal in cheap goods." Hagrid chuckled. "Olaf, you don't understand. There is no way to limit the value of the goods on the ship. For example, a skin can be sold in a few marks, but the local merchants can sell dozens of marks, not to mention the goods. Prices are changeable and cannot be limited. If taxes are set according to the value of the goods, it is not a good thing to say to the nobles and big businessmen of the countries who really control the bulk business. No one wants to implement this. Therefore, in small places such as Ireland and Scotland, we are like this. A merchant ship that runs hard currency once a year is the most advantageous. If we are in London, we will really pay taxes according to the transaction amount." Olaf thought for a while, nodded and said, "Yes, many goods in such a small place have basically no market prices, and local merchants also want to evade tax. Hey, if there is no supervision in the sale and purchase process, unless it is a land and house with a change of property rights, it will even the governor cannot levy transaction tax, he can only collect tax by ship." Note, British currency units are pounds, shillings, and pennies, but before the currency reform, the British pound referred to 1 pound of silver. The currency form is basically a gold coin of more than 20 shillings, and the value is equal to 1 pound of silver. Chapter 52, Noble. Hagrid and Hudic have been running in Ireland for many years, but in the past 2 years Hagrid has handed it over to Olaf, so Olaf and Hudic disembarked first to find familiar merchants, while Hagrid hailed Olaf and others watching the house on the boat. After a long time, the bell of the 4th hour of the church in the distance rang. Olaf looked at the burning clouds in the western sky and asked in confusion, "It's getting dark, why haven't Big Brother and Hudic come back?" Hagrid, who was sitting on the table and playing backgammon with Olaf, thought about how to play, and said, It's okay, the law and order in Dublin is good, and even if you meet the villains, Hudic and Olaf, you can't suffer. Olaf thought about it, so he just blocked Hagrid's two-way chess with one move, and his face changed and he became blue, went down a few more times. Seeing that Olaf had become a fourth son, he couldn't block one end by himself. Suddenly a sailor's voice came from outside, Master Olaf. Captain Hudic. Are you back? Hagrid suddenly got up, ran out with a big laugh, gave Hudic a cordial hug, and then enthusiastically asked, "Men, how is it going? Have you contacted all the buyers?" Hudic's face was weird. He was surprised that Hagrid would suddenly be so enthusiastic, but after all, he was a close friend, and he didn't delve into it. He smiled and said, "Hazel and I used to do some salted fish and seal skins. We only know one Irish one. Snake. He agreed to buy all the dried cod, and the price is good. He can't intervene if he cherishes the fur, so I didn't tell him, Uncle, I went to Grey Bowls. He said he would talk to the governor tomorrow to see how many skins can be eaten. As for royal jelly, he said, he should see with his own eyes, if it fits. It's coming. Royal jelly and skins. I said that we only bought 60 cans and 40 sheets in the Baltic Sea, so that they won't be too greedy. Let's do the rest in Scotland and Amsterdam." Olaf spoke methodically, and then watched Olaf and Hudic didn't understand Grey Bowls' name, and they explained, Grey Bowers is one of the nobles who enjoy the most land in Ireland. At the same time, he is also a baron bestowed by the royal family of England. He is a distant cousin with Prime Minister Stilton. His Excellency Bowers is a great figure in Ireland and a governor. Stephen's relationship is irreversible. His wealth should not be underestimated. If it weren't for worrying that he and the governor would learn that the value of the cargo on our ship was too high for them to take the risk, I would even sell him all the fur. Ulf, you are doing a good job. It's very wise to handle this. Hagrid patted Ulf with relief, and then proposed, "We'll just wait for the big guy to reply on the boat. Hudic, how about it? Go for a drink?" Hudic laughed, and then he disembarked with Olaf and Hagrid with a dozen sailors for a drink, leaving half of the sailors and Olaf to take care of the house. In the middle of the night, Hagrid and the others returned to the boat. Olaf was passively awakened, and found that they were the only ones who gave a cold snort, and then fell asleep early the next morning. A young man in a lace jacket called Olaf's name on the shore. Olaf and Olaf happened to be washing themselves, but Olaf wiped his hands when he heard them clearly, and said, "It must be Lord Bowers' servant." After speaking, Olaf ordered Piku and a white slave sailor to pick up the man on the shore. After a while, Piku took the young man into the cabin. Hagrid, Olaf, and Hudic got up from their seats, while Olaf sat in the corner. The young man wore Irish-style clothing, but he did not wear makeup or ornaments. From his standing posture, he was a senior servant with professional training and education. Mr. Olaf. My lord sir said that today he will go to the governor's mansion for lunch with the governor. Please bring a piece of fur in the afternoon and a jar of royal jelly to go to the governor mansion. He will invite the governor to join him. Tasting, if Sir Ferguson and the governor are satisfied, they will buy them all. The young man gave a small salute, and then said something in a standard London accent. Hagrid and Hudic. Olaf understood 80 to 90% of it, but Olaf only understood it roughly. After all, he didn't have much contact with English in this life, and the English in his last life was also average, let alone the old London accent hundreds of years ago. In fact, although Ireland and Scotland have been conquered by the force of England for hundreds of years, they still maintain autonomy within the system, especially Ireland. Due to the main ethnicity and geographical location, it is fully autonomous. England only sends the governor to manage, and then the Irish people. Efforts to blood. In essence, England ruled Ireland and Denmark ruled Iceland are similar, belonging to colonial rule, but Iceland's position is better than Ireland, because Iceland is more remote and sparsely populated, so fewer people are exploited relative to Ireland. Much because of this reason, Ireland will also demand independence later, and Scotland also applied for 2 referendums to demand independence. Ireland is the largest governor in name, but the governor has to rely on Irish aristocrats and big landlords to ensure notification, so Irish aristocrats such as Bowers are actually very powerful, sending off bold servants. Olaf personally went to get some skins, bear skins, and fox skins. Piku also took out a can of royal jelly. Olaf, come with me, Uncle Hagrid, you and Uncle Hudic are on the boat, Olaf said, changing into the neatest and gorgeous clothes and wearing a feather hat. Hagrid nodded and said, okay. I asked Valley to take 2 white slaves to protect you, Olaf knew that his elder brother and uncle wanted to follow him to see the world, so he went to his room without waiting for Olaf and Hagrid to tell him, and asked Piku to take out his mother and Hana's wife. www.ooksiaspit.com self. My cousin Fanhill sews the Chinese clothes with her own hands. Olaf and Piku worked hard for a long time and finally tied the calves of the pleated fat leg pants, then put on moccasin boots. The upper body was wearing a gold silk jacket, a robe and a black top hat. A rich and exquisite costume made Olaf's skin fairer. Unlike other white teenagers, he has few freckles on his face, and his facial features are exquisite. His face is in the shape of a Chinese character. It looks calm and looks like a big country. Noble child. Olaf looked at Olaf, who entered the cabin, and nodded with a smile, while Hagrid rubbed his beard and smiled. The ancestor Grote was a nobleman of the Kingdom of Norway. Olaf, you and Olaf put on a dress like Copenhagen. The prince, meeting the governor and Bowers, can tell us about our ancestors. Remember, we are the descendants of the Grey Cloak of Jal in the Norwegian kingdom, and we are also a veteran nobleman who has passed on for 9 generations. In this era, nobles are always different from capitalists and ordinary people. After 1,000 years of the Middle Ages, the noble impression of nobles has been rooted in the hearts of every Europa. Even a dilapidated nobleman who communicates with other nobles can get enough respect, because in ancient and modern times, at home and abroad, etiquette was born to divide 3, 6, 9, and distinguish social class and social status. Nobles only pay attention to the nobles. Etiquette, for the Western aristocracy, is not to be courteous to ordinary people, because they had to discuss business with the governor and Bowers in the afternoon. In order to prevent breath and abdominal discomfort, Olaf and Olaf ate a little porridge and a bite of black bread at noon. Feeling that the time was almost up, Olaf and Olaf took Piku, who served as their servants, and Vali, who was to get off the boat. The 2 white slaves carried a few leathers and wooden boxes, and the other held them. A jar of royal jelly. Chapter 53, Make Friends. The upper class in the early 17th century was troublesome and chaotic. Unless there is no other way, nobles generally cannot walk because it will stain their shoes and the hem of their robes, which is very rude to noblemen. Now Olaf and Olaf are going to visit the governor-general as descendants of the nobles of the ancient Kingdom of Norway living in Iceland, so they naturally want to maintain the aristocratic demeanor. After getting off the boat, Olaf asked Valitu to find a carriage, and then Olaf and Valitu got into the carriage, and the 2 white slaves and the goods could only squeeze beside the driver. The carriage slowly left the port. Olaf sat in the bumpy carriage and looked at the scenes on both sides. He found that some places on the dirt road were padded with gravel, and some places were muddy. The road was basically flat, but occasionally there were potholes. Leaving the port, go north to the bridge to the north side of Rahishu River, and then go west along the north side of the river bank. On the right side of the road are low wooden houses and stone houses, and there are not many pedestrians, and the clothes are worn and poor. They are poor people who live by coolies. After walking for about 1,000 steps, I reached the north-south bridge entrance. Looking south along the bridge entrance is a garden and tall and tidy houses. There are many neatly dressed women watering flowers in the yard, but the north of the bridge is still dilapidated. In the scene, further north is a busy city, and at the intersection, you can vaguely see a lot of wild warblers showing their white arms to attract customers. Olaf, who has been to Dublin several times, is very clear about the situation here, so he whispered, "This Hishu River is the bigger Heaney River in Dublin. There are 12 bridges on the river, the slums to the north of the bridge, and the nobles to the south. The place where you live with the wealthy is probably the governor's castle on the south bank of the 4th bridge, which is the center of Ireland. There is also St. Patrick's Cathedral just south of the castle. This was when the Lord's Gospel was in the 5th century in Ireland. The place where the patron St. Patrick is preaching is currently presided over by a cardinal. Catholicism is still believed here? Didn't England also convert to Protestantism?" Olaf raised his eyebrows slightly and asked. Olaf shook his head slightly. "I don't know this. Maybe it's because the King of England didn't ask Ireland to also be converted, or Governor Bowers didn't want to change too much, but this has no effect on us." "Yes," Olaf nodded, and then the carriage turned from a white slate bridge to the south, and when it entered the south bank of the Heaney River, there were birds and flowers everywhere. Olaf pointed to the tall castle not far away, and said, "That is the governor mansion." After a while, everyone got off the bus in the square in front of the castle. Olaf gave the coachman a few pennies. Then Olaf looked up at the castle and found that the castle was simple and tall, and the dark black mottled walls silently expressed the time in it. The mark left on the body. "Very beautiful castle." Olaf nodded and smiled. "I like it very much. Dublin Castle is a castle built by the King George of England in the early 13th century. It was used to store the wealth he squeezed from Ireland. However, since the beginning of the last century, King Henry VIII of England completely declared the King of Ireland in the name of preaching Catholicism. This marked that Ireland had completely become the territory of England. At the same time, he sent the governor to lead the army stationed at Dublin Castle. Land assets were looted and confiscated. At that time, people in Ireland were accused of blasphemer and rebel every day, deprived of their wealth, killed or became slaves. More than a decade ago, King James I of England nationalized 3 million acres of arable land in the Ulster region of Northern Ireland, and then bestowed it on the nobility of England and Scotland. Therefore, with the increasing oppression and deprivation of the England team, Ireland, the governor's responsibilities and powers are also increasing. At present, the governor's house has 500 guards stationed throughout the year. After all, Ireland has a population of millions of people. England had to be on guard. Pico walked to the moat in front of the castle, and said that his masters Olaf and Olaf were invited by Lord Bowles to visit the governor. After a candle was burning, the hanging door slowly fell, and a strong man in half-length plate armor came out, looked at Olaf and Olaf, and then asked, "Are you Olaf, a businessman from Iceland?" "Yes, sir," Olaf replied politely. The strong man nodded and led everyone into the castle. After entering the gate was a huge garden, flanked by bunkers and many halls below. The strong man pointed to the huge inner fort behind the garden and said, "The governor and bower Mr. C is drinking tea in the St. Patrick's room on the second floor. Please follow this guard up." A young guard walked over, and then Olaf and Olaf followed the guards into the inner castle, followed the stairs to the second floor, and walked into a magnificent hall. After turning 3 turns, there were 2 guards standing at the entrance of the hall. There were 2 small doors in the hall, which seemed to be a lounge. The 2 guards asked the guards who led the way, and then went in alone to report and came out after a while. "You can go in." Olaf followed Olaf and his 4 men steadily walked into the inner hall, and then saw that the inner hall was only 30 steps in radius. There was a long table on which was embroidered with the gold-rimmed wool and dark green tablecloth. The table was sitting on one end. A man with tendrils and a trench coat looks handsome in his 50s and 60s. Not far from him sits a 40 or 50-year-old man with a brown beard and hair, pretending to be rich and handsome. Also wears 2 opal rings. Olaf stepped forward 2 steps, stroking his chest while taking off his hat, and then said loudly, "After the grey cloak of the Kingdom of Norway, Olaf, the son of the Icelandic chief, has met Governor Stephen and Lord Bowers." Olaf also learned something. After the 2 salutes, the tendril man waved his hand and said, "Since they are descendants of the northern nobles, they seem to have learned a lot. Please sit down." Stephen touched his beard and chuckled, "I heard Bowers just now that you are in your 20s, but you have inherited the family for several years." "Yes, young people must dare to fight. Yours brothers are good too." "Very good, thank you for your compliment. May the Lord bless you." Olaf and Olaf smiled and thanked them, then sat down, their waists straightened, lest they be rude. Bowers took a sip of his tea, pointed to a few people who were still standing, and said, "Olaf, you should bring skin and royal jelly. Please see how the quality is, Master Governor." Governor Stephen waved his hand, and an Irish servant who was waiting on his side came forward to receive the tea set. Olaf hurriedly got up and ordered Piku and others to take out the leather goods and put them in front of the governor and bowls. The 2 picked up the skins and stroked them, smiling, and the wrinkles on their faces softened. "Beaver skin feels as smooth as silk and satin." "No, it should be better than silk and satin. There are fewer and fewer leathers of this grade now." "Very good." Stephen picked up a leather and touched it for a while before putting it down, then looked at the other leathers one by one, and then said with a smile, "Your leather goods are of very high grade. How many skins do you have?" Olaf got up and said, "Return to the governor, we only bought these leather goods in the deep northwest of the Baltic Sea this time. The quantity is not large, and the cost is huge." Before Olaf finished speaking, Stephen waved his hand, turned his head to look at Bowers, and asked, "I think these 2 little guys are really good. Give them a fair price. You can tell me how much you want. Don't grab skins, I'll give you all the other leathers. How about?" Bowers thought for a while, touched the opal on the index finger of his right hand with his left hand, smiled and said, "You have to share a few of me. I will go to London next month to make a gift for the Prime Minister's birthday." "All right. For your friendship." Stephen shrugged. Bowers looked at Olaf this time and said, "It's not the first time you have come to Dublin. We all know the price of skins, so let me give you the price of £20 for a skin. If you want gold coins, It's 2 pounds, skins are 15 pounds silver, bear skins can give you 40 pounds, fox and wolf skins are 9 pounds, how do you feel? Olaf thought for a while, then nodded, and said, I can accept the price of your lord. Chapter 54, Get Rich. After the price was negotiated, Bowers beckoned someone to bring paper and pen, and then signed an agreement with Stephen and Olaf. The agreement was in triplicate, stating how many leathers each person bought at what price, and then Bowers and Stephen's servants went down to withdraw money. The servants opened the earthen jar and presented a silver spoon. Both Bowers and Stephen smelled the sweet and unique fragrance of royal jelly. As a glutton, the two had eaten famous desserts from all over the world, but the taste of royal jelly still made them feel good. Feel new. Stephen took some out with a spoon, poured it on Bull's plate, and took another spoonful of it himself and took a bite. The mouth was instantly wrapped in a special fragrance and sweetness. This sweet but not greasy refreshment made the two of them take another bite. Yes. This royal jelly is delicious, but I don't think it's honey. Olaf, can you tell me what this is? Stephen wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, then looked at Olaf curiously and asked. Olaf looked at his brother next to him, smiled and said, the royal jelly is a treasure that my brother Olaf got. He can only tell you the history of it. Olaf got up and looked at the governor. His eyes were neither humble nor overbearing, and he said in a calm tone, royal jelly is the precious honey I bought deep in the dense forests of southern Africa. At that time, I met a yellow-skinned person in the dense forest. I thought it was taters, but in the end it was discovered that they claimed to be Inuit, a special ethnic group living near South Africa. These people were also recorded in the history of Iceland. In the historical saga, they were called Unipid. I saved an injured Inuit boy. This is Piku. He is now my servant. In order to thank me, their tribe gave me the royal jelly they found on the South African plateau. According to them, royal jelly is the honey made from the essence of the plateau flowers and plants is unique to the South African plateau. It is more precious and valuable than ordinary honey. It is said that eating it can strengthen the yang, treat impotence and premature ejaculation, help the weak to restore health, and long-term consumption can also extend life. Olaf ran the train with a sincere expression on his face. Stephen and Bowers noticed that Piku was a yellow-skinned boy this time. This surprised the two who had never seen a yellow man, and believed Olaf's words. 7 to 8% Piku, salute the two lords, Olaf said sharply. Pikiku, who had prepared in advance, stepped forward and bowed, and then spoke the Inuit language. Stephen and Bowers laughed and raised their hands to signal Piku to get up. I have only heard of people with yellow skin in the Far East, such as Indians and Chinese. I didn't expect that there are people with yellow skin near South Africa. It's amazing. Bowers looked at Peak. Curry was surprised. Stephen said in remembrance, when I was young, I followed Master Francis Drake to West India. The Indians there looked different from this person. Olaf, you are so young but you are so good at talking and so brave. I can go deep into the forest to explore. I appreciate you very much. You can come to me if you need it in the future. Olaf did not expect that his performance beyond his age and status gave Stephen a heart to love talents, and he hurriedly bowed to salute. Thank you, my lord. I bought your royal jelly at the price of Mingo's sugar. If there are more powers in the next batch, you can buy it again. Stephen chuckled and looked at his old friend beside him. Bowers smiled helplessly, and snorted coldly, I will give it to you if you want it. Next time I will ask for it by myself. I won't notify you. When the servants went to fetch the gold, everyone chatted a few more words, and then the two parties handed over the contract and the coins. Stephen stretched out to go to a nap. Bowers told the servant to follow Olaf to pick up the leather goods, and then left brothers Olaf and Olaf watched the servants move to the large boxes in front of them, opened one of them and saw a box full of gold coins. They couldn't help but feel a little excited. Let's go back soon. It will be completely dark in 2 more hours, and the goods of Lord Governor and Lord Bowers must be delivered as soon as possible. Olaf was the first to wake up and reminded hurriedly. After all, Olaf was the first time he saw a box full of gold coins. After returning to his senses, he hurriedly took Veritu, Piku and others to lift up 7 or 8 boxes and leave the governor's mansion. The governor mansion sent a steward and 6 servants to follow, and also led 2 carriages. I heard that your excellency didn't come here by car, so I brought an extra cart to lend to you, the steward said politely. Thank you. After thanking Olaf, he ordered everyone to put the cash box on the car. When Olaf and Olaf were about to get in the car, the servant of Bowers appeared suddenly in the morning. Sir Olaf, my master has invited you and Master Olaf. Olaf and Olaf looked sideways, and saw that the door of the carriage not far away was open. And Bowers was sitting on the carriage waving his hands at the two. A few of you, please." Olaf apologized to the governor's house manager and smiled and took Olaf to the front of Bauer's car. "Your lord, do you have anything else to tell us, brothers?" Bauer smiled happily, nodded lightly at the two, and then said softly, "I'm just looking for two people. Just want to ask if you still have some inventory. If there is, I want to follow the negotiated price in the castle. All purchases. If there is another batch, I also ask for priority purchase." "I don't know what your opinion is." Olaf saw that Bowers was more cordial than before. He guessed that it might be because Governor Stephen said to take care of himself, and of course he might want to get some goods. Olaf thought for a while and said, "Okay, Lord, we have kept some goods, but skins are too scarce. We only have 25 sheets. Now there are only 5 sheets left. There is still some royal jelly." Olaf nodded and said, "Yes, we still have 20 cans of royal jelly. We were going to bring it back to Iceland, but you can sell it to you if you want it." "That's great. How many skins are there?" "Fox or wolf skins are fine. There are some more, but not much," Olaf said, thinking. Bowers laughed, and then ordered his servants to go home to fetch the gold coins, and then said, "I will let people take the money to pick up the goods, and I will pay you as much as I can." "Olaf and Olaf, you two young people. Very good. I think you will become big businessmen in a while, so I am willing to be your friends like Stephen. You can also find me if you need it." "Thank you, Lord." The two hurriedly gave thanks. Reading www.uucanchu.com. Bowers closed the door, and the carriage gradually moved away. Olaf and Olaf looked at each other and smiled, then turned and got into the carriage. Valet drove the car in front. The white slave was sitting in the car guarding the money box. Olaf was still excited. According to his estimate, 40 skins and 100 other skins totaled a little more than 1,000 pounds. The value of more than 1,000 pound gold coins is nearly 2,000 gold marks. If you change into silver marks, it is 20,000 gold. Heider's entire family property in Iceland is 20,000 silver marks, of which 10,000 was paid to Sigfurs 8 years ago. These assets are the accumulation of the Heider family for generations, but in more than 70 furs. In front of him, Olaf easily earned the hard work of several generations of his ancestors. This kind of magic and change made Olaf amazed, but Olaf was still able to accept it after all. For the great nautical era, the income from planting is far less than the income from the Shanghai trade, and the income from the maritime trade is not as good as the colonial trade, because maritime trade is a transaction process of buying and selling. After the assets are invested, they take risks and go to other places, earn the difference. However, colonial trade does not require asset input. All commodities are obtained by plundering, and the commodities sold are full profits. Royal jelly was received by Stephen at the price of sugar. Now the price of sugar in luxury goods is twice that of honey, but top honey will narrow the price difference. A pound of sugar has sold for 40 shillings to half a pound of silver. A can of royal jelly weighs about 20 pounds. According to the price of 40 shillings, it is 40 pounds a can. 60 cans sold for a total of 240 pounds, which is less than 500 silver marks. This is much higher than Olaf's expected income. Olaf is very satisfied with his income. 500 silver marks are enough to buy 30 guns. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55, White Slave Business. 2 carriages bumped into the dock all the way back on the ship. The sailors helped the servants of the governor's mansion carry the fur and royal jelly. The steward took the servants and drove away, while Heider and Hagrid kept counting the money with a few boxes of gold coins. Hagrid used to have more than a dozen skins a year, and sold half of them to the French. He couldn't make a lot of money even if he was full, but he made a trip to Ireland this year and made more than one in the past 7 years. Money. This made Hagrid completely believe that Wenlin could only be led by his brother Heider, and he became excited. In fact, dozens of leather goods were sold at such a high price. Many of the reasons were that the governor had a good impression of Olaf and Olaf and did not lower the price. When he reached his age, he often saw promising young people willing to take care of him. It is to invest in the future. After a while, Bauer's servants also came. After Olaf went out to negotiate, he sold 10 skins and 30 other skins, and 40 cans of royal jelly. After the people of Bowers left, Schilt, Hudic, Valitu, and Lund carried the money box and followed Olaf into the cabin. Well, after opening the box, everyone counted, and then Heider said, "Ruddy, We sold 50 skins this time, other skins more than 60, and more than 3,000 pounds of dried cod and more than 300 gallons of wine. 1,600 pounds of gold coins were sold, which is equal to 3,156 gold marks. When converted into silver marks, it is more than 30,000 silver marks. Hiss, everyone took a deep breath. For the Icelanders, more than 30,000 silver marks could buy the land of a village, and they were all happy after returning. The white slave will reduce the contract time for 1 year. One person will give out 10 pounds of gold coins, and the others will receive 50 pounds of gold coins, Heir happily said, and everyone became more excited after listening. Then Heir sent someone to buy beer, ready to get drunk on the boat to celebrate. Hudik was still sober, pulled Heir, and said sharply, "No more white slaves? First find someone to settle the matter of recruiting white slaves, and then we bought wine and left the harbor before drinking. We got drunk here. You don't know if you were killed and took the money." Everyone suddenly woke up, and then Heir ordered Olaf and Hagrid to contact the northern landlords who lived in Dublin, and through them recruited the northern white people to sell themselves as slaves to Vinland. Because of the oppression of the King of England, it is now the most bitter and poorest. It is the northern part of Ireland that has been selling children and women for a long time, especially in the Ulster area in the northwest. Many of the white slaves that England defrauded New England on the east coast of North America more than 10 years ago were Irish, and the 3 white slaves Hagrid recruited in the past 7 years were mostly white slaves in Northern Ireland. The southern part of Ireland is more stable and wealthy, and life is still alive, but the north is much worse. In order to improve the political environment and treatment in the north, the big landlords have been living in Dublin. They lobbied the governor to reduce taxes in the north, or advised the British king to give Catholics a certain amount of living space. Stephen naturally ignored the northern landlords and always ignored them, but the big landlords who could not change the status quo in the north for many years also began to quietly help northern Irish people to escape overseas, so as to reduce the population pressure on his estate. Setting aside land will also allow domestic farmers to find a way to survive, so that northern landlords can get land and a white slave selling money. This business is currently preferred by northern landlords. Among these northern landlords, the most active and powerful one is a big landlord named Raleigh Amor. Hagrid and Olaf met Amor in the villa near St. Patrick's Cathedral in the southern district. This is a mature man of the same age as Hagrid. He is tall, with tough skin and a fiery red hair. He is the purest Celtic. "Brother Hagrid, you are here again." After Amor and Hagrid shook hands, the 3 of them sat down, and then asked, "Come and make a fortune this time? I heard that Olaf sold it to the governor in bulls. The old boy has a lot of skins and what kind of queen honey. Your business is really getting bigger and bigger. Why? Is there really gold everywhere in America?" Ho laughed and said, "If you guys want to go with me and pull a boat. Although it's a bit harder, you can live a good life." Amor lightly shook his head and sighed. "Hey. I am the patriarch of several families in the north. Tens of thousands of people count on me to feed. I really want to visit America, but I can't go. Look at the Irish now. I can't live anymore. How can I bear to leave? Humph. Charlie is a bad thing. I really want to." It seems that it's because Hagrid and Olaf are not natives, and they seem to have a good relationship. As Amor talked about it, he was superb, and then he hurriedly stopped, coughed, and asked, "Well, you still want to recruit slaves and go to America?" Hagrid and Olaf had long known that the Irish hated the English people secretly. They pretended not to hear Amor's true feelings. He laughed and said, "Yes, we are going to recruit more this time. It's best. It's a single male or a young couple, and it's okay to have one child, but those over 50 years old don't want it. You have to help screen them." Amor frowned slightly, as if embarrassed, and said after a while, "In this case, the price would have to be increased by half, and their families would have to leave more for the support of the family to pay for the settlement. A contract slave costs £5 My buddy, what you said is too expensive. We can find cerumen for cheaper than this," Hagrid said gruffly. The 2 argued for half a day, and finally reached an agreement at a price of 65 shillings per household. Hagrid asked for more than 200 people in 100 households, and then agreed that the delivery person would be in the northern port of Amor's hometown in 20 days to a month. Money. Hagrid pushed back Amor's invitation to have dinner, and then hurried back with Olaf. After getting on the boat and talking about the situation, Heir breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "Our mission to Ireland has been completed. Hudik and Hild, you are raw faces. Take a few sailors who don't show up very much to buy a few barrels of beer. Let's leave Dublin tonight. Let's all eat and drink at sea. During the day, Hader had bought enough water, food, chicken, duck, and fish for the 2 ships. After a while, Hewlett came back with a dozen barrels of beer. www.wooksiaspit.com. Hader gave an order, 2 ships. The ship set sail at the same time, and after leaving the port, it headed south. After entering the sea for a long time, it was not until we left St. George's Strait and entered the English Channel that a sail was taken in the sea and the boat drifted southeast at a speed of 2 or 3 knots. Then the 2 people in the boat began to suffer under the leadership of Hader and Hewlett. Eat and drink. The excitement did not go to bed until the middle of the night. After getting up the next morning, he reloaded the sails again, controlled the vessel to turn northeast, and then went east with all his strength. On the morning of the 3rd day, the 2 ships Thor's Hammer and Hope passed through the Strait of La Manche, the Strait of Dover, and the Strait of Calais, passing through the Thames estuary into London, passing through the North Wadden Sea in the Netherlands, and arriving south to Amsterdam. The Netherlands has just risen now. Although the North Sea Grand Canal, which runs from Amsterdam to the North Sea to the west, was built last year, because the continuous canal in the city is still dredging, it will only be put into use in the second half of the year. Olaf, when they came, the canal was closed for dredging, so they could only enter Amsterdam from the northern Zuiderzee. The Netherlands began to reclaim the sea 30 years ago, but the Zuider Lake, the IJsselmeer, has not yet been transformed. The Netherlands, a country called the United Republic of the 7 Provinces of the Netherlands, is a well-known lowland country with developed water systems, rich river channels, and sea breeze blowing to the coast. The Dutch coast is surrounded by windmills. This kind of windmill is not a decoration of later generations, but used as flour processing for mills. The Netherlands is currently an important country for the transshipment of fish, wine, noodles and other food across the Baltic, Mediterranean and North Seas. The rise of the Netherlands is also closely related to the critical location, convenient transportation, and food production and processing. Inseparable factors. Note, the early exchange standard for British currency was 240 pence equals 20 shillings equals £1 silver. Chapter 56, Amsterdam. Amsterdam, the economic and political center of the United Republic of the 7 Provinces of the Netherlands. Because the Dutch province is the richest and largest area in the Netherlands, which is the real core, it is also called the Dutch Republic. After decades of struggle, the Dutch people have been ravaged and slaughtered by the Spanish colonists. Now the Netherlands has risen rapidly thanks to the developed maritime trade. Now it is in the fishing, shipbuilding, grain processing trade, linen, wool, and fur industries. They are all leaders in European countries, especially the fishery and shipbuilding industries, and they have already led the United Kingdom, France, and Spain, and have the foundation to dominate all of Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries. The Champagne Bazaar on the north coast of France was the most active, and it was the peak of European trade. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Amsterdam was the international metropolis that replaced the Champagne Bazaar and even won. At the port of Amsterdam, more than 2,000 large and small ships are handled every day. If the economy is calculated according to the port's call volume and throughput, Amsterdam can be the top of the total of all ports in Britain and France. There are Nordic woolen cloth and leather goods, British wool, Mediterranean wine and sugar, Arabian spices, African ivory, rhino horn, Far East porcelain and silk-free. Merchants from various countries and agents of major capitalist firms shuttle through the exchanges and terminals in Amsterdam every day, go in and out on ships of various countries, buy and sell various commodities, and then ship them to various places through their own or commercial ships. Thor's Hammer and Hope were close to the port, and there were flag bearers to solicit the ships to enter the port. And then when the ship broke down and stopped, the flag bearers on the shore shouted something. Olaf and the others walked onto the deck, listening to them for a long time but didn't quite understand. Do you speak English? Or German? I don't understand. Hagrid frowned and shook his head. Dutch dialect, Olaf said uncertainly. Which of us understand? Olaf looked at the people and the white slave sailor around him, and everyone shook their heads at this time. Hewlett spoke in a tone similar to that of the standard bearer on the Hope. Hager laughed and said, Hewlett is Swiss, he can speak German, and he might be able to communicate with Dutch people. Hewlett talked to the flag bearer for a long time, and then shouted at Hagrid and them, we have to go to the exchange to buy and sell goods in Amsterdam. After registering and obtaining the tax license, we can list and trade. If we exchange currency, we will go to the Bank of Amsterdam in the southeast of the terminal. There you can store currencies of various countries and exchange them for bills, and then trade with the bills. When you leave, you can exchange bills for coins at the bank. Olaf pondered, and suddenly remembered that the world's first bank seemed to be born in the Netherlands in the early 17th century. Along with it was the stock exchange, which seemed to be buying and selling Dutch East India. The company's stocks were used to raise funds to develop ocean-going business. Later, as the East India Company's business got better and better, the stocks became more and more valuable, and then the West India Company was established. However, after colonizing Brazil, it went bankrupt due to a long war. Hudik and I went to the stock exchange to register for listing, and then Olav, you took Olaf and Valator to exchange bills. We have to buy some flour, seeds, containers, weapons, and exchange tickets for 1,000 gold marks to avoid any money. It's too fascinating. Hagrid thought for a while, took Olav and ordered a few words, and then disembarked with Hudik and went to the exchange with a purse. Olav Littlehurt, Valator and others looked after the house. Olaf and Piku took 2 Icelanders and 6 white slaves and got off the boat. 11 people walked on the pier with 5 chests full of gold coins with their swords on their waists. Olaf wore 2 throwing axes around his waist, and Piku followed behind him with a short spear on his back. When they left the dock, everyone frowned because there were guards guarding the dock outside. 11 of them were carrying weapons, and 4 guards stepped forward to stop them after speaking a few words in Dutch. Olav and others could not understand it. The soldiers in the lead spoke English and Danish again. Who are you? Olav hurriedly said in Danish with a smile on his face that they were going to the bank. The soldier suddenly realized, and then said mockingly, Amsterdam has very good law and order. There are guards patrolling the streets to prevent robbery. You have to go to the bank. You can call a carriage. Don't be so grand, it will make people mistaken for a mob. Olaf turned his head and looked around, and found that there were also a few businessmen with heavy money bags, but only 1 or 2 servants followed. He wondered if Amsterdam did not maintain law and order, how could he ensure that businessmen can operate safely here, and he could not help but secretly praise the Netherlands in power. The wisdom of the person. Olav smiled and then called 2 carriages. Everyone got on the carriages and left the pier and walked towards the city center. The Netherlands is a lowland country. Amsterdam is just above the sea level. There are canals and rivers everywhere. Horse-drawn carriages are constantly shuttled in the bends of the bridge. Although the bustling scene and dense crowds of people can be seen on both sides, it didn't take long for Olaf to tell clear direction for those who grew up from Iceland, such as Olav. There are hundreds of people on the streets, but Amsterdam is full of people, and some streets are almost crowded with people. This kind of prosperous scene is unheard of. I have never seen it before. Are stunned, and feel nervous at the same time. Oh my God. There are so many people here. I'm almost out of breath. Veritu swallowed and spitted. Olav also squeezed his hands and dared not look outside, but Olaf laughed, turned his head to observe the embarrassment of the people, and then found Pikusur trembling, and smiled. Piku, are you afraid of crowds, master? It's terrible, Piku replied with a trembled head in his arms. Olaf thought you would be crazy if you saw the attractions of the Golden Week on May 11th. Don't be afraid, it's okay with too many people. Olaf chuckled slightly. www.wooksyaspit.com. Don't be afraid, just check it out and get used to it. Are you okay? Olav looked at Olaf and said in surprise, of course it's okay. Olaf smiled and pointed out. You have to look carefully at this scene. Talent is the foundation of a country's prosperity and prosperity. This kind of hustle and bustle, how prosperous and fascinating is this kind of people coming and going? Olav looked out along Olaf's fingers, and then thought along his words. For a while, he seemed to have become an outsider, watching people on the roadside buying and selling fruits and vegetables, dried fish, and watching the guards on the roadside catch them. The thieves watched the children pestering their parents to buy scones on the street. After a long time, Olav came back to his senses, and then sighed. Yes, this is what a person should be. The prosperity here is 10 times better than Iceland and 1,000 times better than Wenland, but in the future, Wenland will be as prosperous, rich and populous as Amsterdam. Olav's eyes gradually became firm, and then he looked outside with relish. Olaf's heart jumped and he couldn't help but think, both Father Hader and eldest brother Olav now have a heroic spirit beyond ordinary people, much better than ordinary people, but they have no achievements and reputation in history, and they have rebelled against Iceland. The front is also wrapped in an ordinary boring life. Does this mean that heroes also need to use their skills? There is a saying that the times make heroes. Does it mean that even a hero, if you don't have the right opportunity and platform, you will still be confused? Did my appearance help my father and elder brother, or did my elder brother's father help me? After thinking about it for a long time, Olaf's mind finally only reverberated with a poem, which made him become more energetic. Is the golden carp a thing in the pond? It will turn into a dragon when it encounters a storm. Chapter 57, Bank. The carriage stopped in front of the bank with a white painted wall, and the coachman said in blunt Danish, "At the bank, sir." Olaf threw 7 or 8 copper plates to the coachman, and then everyone got out of the car. Olaf glanced at the honest driver when he got out of the car, and was slightly curious about why the 17th century taxi driver was so taciturn and not as talkative as the drivers of later generations. Is it because of living environment or religious culture? However, as a Dutchman, this driver can speak simple Danish and English, which shows that there are too many foreign businessmen in Amsterdam. This is the style of an international metropolis. In the 17th century, Olaf is basically satisfied with what he has seen and heard in Amsterdam. He thinks it is a little better than he expected. The streets are clean, the city is prosperous, and the planning is reasonable. If this is what the top cities of the 17th century looked like, they already have the basic characteristics of a modern city. Thinking about Olaf following Olaf into the door of the bank. The bank is a 2-story classical building. The door face is pasted with marble, and there is an exquisite glass door pushing the door and entering. There are 2 rows of benches in the lobby. There is a tall counter in the innermost area. In the counter are sitting male bank staff wearing jackets and shirt collars. Are they sitting on the benches? There are few people, and many people are standing in front of the counter. A young gentleman wearing white gloves came over and smiled in standard Latin. "Sir, what can I do for you?" Latin was the common language of civilized countries with Catholicism as the core before the Reformation, and belonged to Mandarin in Europe. Therefore, no matter which country, all cultural people can speak Latin and write Latin characters. Olaf also went to church school for a few years, so he understood what the gentleman said, and then replied in Latin, "Sir, we are here to save money." "Oh." The gentleman glanced at the money box that the strong white slave was holding tightly. His years of work experience made him see that the heavy feeling was not silver coins. The 5 boxes of gold coins are not small, even if it is usually. You may not be able to see such a large amount of money once a week. "Sir, if you want to save money, please follow me to the 2nd floor." The gentleman guided Olaf and the others up to the 2nd floor with a smile, and then pointed to the sofa on the 2nd floor and said, "Please sit on this new upholstered chair. We all call it a sofa. Gentlemen, please sit down and I will handle the business for you myself." "Hello sir, this is Frederick Koichi, the associate manager of the Bank of Amsterdam. How much do you want to deposit? How big is the bill?" Sitting in the deck on the 2nd floor, Kai introduced himself first, and then asked Olaf if let the cash box be placed on the table in front of Kai, and then said, "This is probably £1 sterling and Swedish dollar worth 1,000 gold marks. Please change it to a Dutch guilder note." "Okay sir." There are only silver coins in Dutch guilders. 20 Dutch guilders is equal to £1, and 1 gold mark is approximately equal to 110 Dutch guilders. "I will check Mr.'s gold coins first." While talking, Yi opened the box elegantly, and then sorted and counted the colors. Currency. Some people who are uncertain will measure the weight on a scale. Finally, I took a carbon rod and calculated it on paper for a long time. He said, "I will charge you £5,687. The value of the Dutch guilders is 113,740 guilders. Now I will do it for you. Do you want a check to issue a receipt?" Olaf asked about the meaning of the check, then nodded and said, "Make 2. Bank of Amsterdam now only provides deposits and currency exchange services, and then charges about 1,000th to 5/10ths of a thousandth during the exchange period. The lending business of later banks has not yet appeared, so there is no interest in depositing money. This is more from the Far Eastern Celestial Dynasty's ticket number. The bank lags behind a bit similarly, because banks are a new type of industry. Checks in this period are not standardized, but they also have a withdrawal function." Yi took out a fine paper with patterns and stamped it with a bank stamp. At the same time, he wrote down his name and the code of the 2 checks with goose feathers dipped in ink. The amount of the check is blank. You can fill it out at will, but it cannot exceed the deposit of your husband. You will be charged 5/10,000ths of the exchange fee when you withdraw the money. After the ink is dried, Kai will give 2 checks and a deposit certificate to Olaf. All 3 tickets must be signed by Olaf because the original bill of deposit certificate has his signature. That is to say, if someone takes the deposit certificate to withdraw money, he must be able to write the same handwriting name as on the original Olaf bill, but the check is not necessary. As long as the amount and signature are filled in, anyone can come to the bank to withdraw money. provided that the name and handwriting on the check are the same as the original bill. The function of checks is to use merchants to buy bulk commodities. It is something that appears in order to save money in the process of collecting money. Currently, it can only be used in Amsterdam. Shook the brass bell on the table, and a few big guys showed up and removed the gold coins. Then he smiled and said, "It's really comfortable to serve Mr. What do you call it, Olaf Hadarsson?" Olaf nodded with a smile, and at the same time replied, "You are an elegant gentleman. I don't think your future achievements will stop at a small bank assistant. Thank you for your blessing." Gu smiled, and then couldn't help saying, "Actually, I am leaving the Netherlands next month. The bank manager recommends that I be transferred to the East India Company. Next month I will go to East India Spices. The islands have helped the governor of Batavia manage the spice business, so your vision is very accurate. That's really congratulations," Olaf said and shook hands with Ke. Olaf suddenly remembered the Dutch governor who had lost to the country's surname and evacuated Taiwan 30 years later. He was also called Ke, so he said, "Mr. Ke, you will definitely have it when you go to the Far East. Great achievements, but I heard that the Daming country in the Far East is very powerful. The land area and population are almost the size of the whole of Europe. I also heard that Portugal once tried to invade the Ming country but was defeated. So I think any country wants to be in the Far East. To develop, we must maintain respect for Daming country. What do you think? Are you?" Quee's words about Olaf are very strange, because in Europe, unless they are employees and shareholders of the East India Company, basically no one knows that porcelain and silk come from Ming dynasty, and many people are still influenced by the Arabs. The influence is called kitten. This is my brother Olaf. Olaf smiled and introduced Ke. Olaf and Mr. Harnred of the Danish East India Company are friends, and they have a better understanding of the Far East. Oh, Ke nodded, shook hands with Olaf enthusiastically, and then whispered, "Mr. Olaf looks underage, but your vision is very unique and accurate. I heard about the governors of the Far East. They all want to open the door of Ming dynasty, but they have been banning the sea. The same is true for North Korea, Japan and other countries affected by Ming dynasty." "Then do you know that there are people with the same name as you in the East India Company in the Far East?" Olaf asked again for confirmation. "As far as I know, it's gone," Ke said, looking at Olaf in doubt. Olaf smiled slightly, and finally said, "Maybe what I said is simple and profound, but Mr. Ke, yours is indeed a gentleman. My brother and I want to make your friend, so I remind you, if it is not necessary, please don't go. Daming's pirates and navy will never tolerate an invasion of Daming's territory, especially the island of Taiwan." Chapter 58, Food. Ke disapproved of Olaf's words in his heart, but he heard that he was sincerely admonishing himself, and that Olaf was very knowledgeable at a young age, and his brother took 100,000 guilders in the bank. He must be a northern nobleman. I'm afraid that their accent is from Denmark or Norway, and it may be useful in the future. Thinking of this, he nodded and smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Olaf, for your advice. I will pay attention." Olaf knew that he would not really make Kuya not be the governor of Taiwan in the future, but he knew that his views on the Far East would make Kuya value himself, and this worked. "Mr. Ke, if you return to China next year, I hope you can help me bring some specialties from Daming country. The price is definitely not a problem." "No problem, Mr. Olaf. Please make a list. I will find it for you when I arrive in Batavia next month." After talking, he took the pen and paper and handed it to Olaf. Olaf wrote the names of tea sets, tableware and other blue and white porcelain in Latin, as well as radix satidus, honeysuckle and other effective Chinese medicines for treating colds, fever and anti-inflammatory. The amount is calculated in £100 in addition to porcelain and traditional Chinese medicine. Olaf also wrote 3 books, Compendium of Materia Medica by Li Shizhen, Nongsheng Quanshu by Su Guangqi, and Xian Gong Kwu by Song Yingxing. Even the author's name and the title of the book are spelled in Latin, and wrote simplified Chinese next to it. Traditional Olaf can't write it, and finally handed it to Ke, who took a look and praised Olaf for his knowledge. He could even write the complicated text of the East, and then promised to help Olaf find him as soon as possible. The two agreed to come to the bank to trade in April next year. Kent come to the meeting to ask people to carry the exchanged signature slips for transactions. After finishing the business affairs, Olaf asked Gui about the location of the grain shop. Gui introduced a grain shop with excellent reputation to Olaf, and then he personally sent Olaf Olaf and others out of the bank. Olaf and Olaf left the bank with ease, and then walked all the way to the vicinity of Rembrandt Gardens, according to the path pointed out by Kuai. Then they saw a huge warehouse. In front of the warehouse was a circular canal constructed by hand. The small boat on the side of the canal unloads the bagged wheat, rye and other grains, and then drives the boat to the middle gate and then moves into the warehouse, but most of them are transported and ground flour on the other side of the canal. Docked boats lined up to pull food. Olaf looked at the bustling people in front of the grain shop and couldn't help but exclaimed, "The scale of this barred grain shop is too big. I feel that the whole of Iceland does not have as much grain as his grain shop." Olaf looked at the working white people with passion, and realized that this is the power of capital. Everyone who participates in it can gain something. They have hope for the future and passion for life. Becoming the hegemon of the world in 10 years is probably the support of this kind of power. Approaching the food shop, before Olaf spoke, a young apprentice greeted him with a smile on his face. Olaf and Olaf can't help but praise the Dutch for their ability to do business. People can rise from decades to come by being able to read business lessons. In fact, the attitude of Dutch businessmen is not much better, much worse than later generations of sales staff, but at least they are enthusiastic, smile and pay attention to commercial quality. Compared with the Dutch, Olaf and Olaf think that the Icelanders who do business are too far behind. It can be said that if there is a professional standard for Icelandic businessmen, there is only one sentence: please don't beat customers for no reason. The Viking is a left-handed axe, a right-handed knife, wine and gold in his pocket, and war hymns and epics in his head. Icelanders are descendants of the Vikings. They are no longer barbaric. They are left-handed axes and right-handed hoes, with wine and leather in their pockets, and sakaya and children in their heads. Olaf said that he needed to purchase a large amount of flour. The young apprentice hurriedly led the crowd into the grain shop. At the same time, he shouted loudly in Dutch. A fat old man walked over and said in bad Danish, "Here are two young masters. Hello. I am the boss of the Bud Food Company. You can call me Old Bud. I heard Lorraine say that you need a lot of flour." "Yes, Old Bud," Olaf asked, referring to the mountains of grain in the grain store. Mr. Kitchi from the bank introduced me. I need 20,000 pounds of rye flour, wheat flour and barley. Noodles are 10,000 pounds each, and barley, wheat, and rye that are not whole are also 10,000 pounds. It's true that there are a lot of these products in the Old Bud's grain store. You introduce them by Guai, and I can give you a discount. Then, rye noodles are 10 duits per pound, and wheat noodles are 12 duits. Barley noodles 9 duit. A series of quotations made by Bard got Olaf to approve on the spot, and then the two drafted a contract and stated in the contract that Old Bard should pay taxes, and then the two made one copy. Although Olaf doesn't care about food prices, he feels cheap after listening to Bud's offer. A pound of rye noodles in Iceland costs nearly 20 copper plates. Duit is a Dutch copper coin. The exchange rate with the Dutch guilders is about 40 to 1. 9 Dutch guilders are worth about 1 mark, while 1 mark in Iceland is worth more than 200 Danish copper plates, 360 duit copper coins. So if you count the food shipped to Iceland for sale, there will actually be a gross profit of 70 to 80%. Even if you exclude all expenses, there will be a profit of more than 30%. It can be seen from the grain that sailing is a matter of both risks and gains. Olaf signed a check with a face value of 12,200 dongs to Old Bard and handed it to him, including the transaction tax of 600 dongs to be paid by Old Bard. www.uxiaspit.com. Old Bard, after looking at it and making sure it was correct, he put it away carefully, and then asked, "Are you in a hurry? If you don't have to wait for me to go to the bank tomorrow and cancel the ticket, I will ship it to you. I don't know where your ship stops. No hurry, our goods have not been delivered yet. You can deliver them the day after tomorrow." Olaf thought for a while and said, "Our ship is parked at port 21. You can find me when you arrive. My name is Olaf. In case you are not there, find a husband from Hagrid. He is my uncle." "Okay. Mr. Olaf. You northerners like to eat rye noodles. No wonder you have so much rye flour. It tastes delicious." Old Bud knew that he was a Nordic when he heard the name, so he was more polite. Olaf got up and was about to leave. Olaf suddenly asked, "Old Mr. Bard, do you know if the flour milling equipment in the windmill and watermill workshops of your grain shop is for sale? If there is more, we would like to see it." Look, Olaf's language habits gave Old Bud a stunned. Olaf had already reacted. He remembered that Wenland needed a set of advanced windmilling equipment, so he said, "We also want a set of windmill milling equipment." "Old Bud, do you sell it?" You can find a handicraft workshop to make a set. My windmill workshops are all in production and cannot be sold to you, but I can recommend a windmill maker to you, Old Bud said, telling Olaf and Olaf where there is a workshop for making windmill flour milling equipment. Olaf and Olaf left a bard grain shop and found a yard in the northern area according to the route the old bard said. Chapter 59, Windmill. The big city of Amsterdam is full of rivers and artificial canals. Goods are transported in the canals by small boats and ships, which is extremely convenient, but the most prosperous area is the southern area. The northern area is relatively remote. Because of its remoteness and underdeveloped commerce, there are many large and small handicraft workshops, which can be regarded as the prototype of an industrial park. Olaf took a look on the road and found that many of them are the production of shipboard supplies and shipbuilding parts, and some are workshops for making fishing gear and nets. These are the pillar industries of the Netherlands, and it makes sense that the surrounding processing industries have also become prosperous. Among entering the yard, Valeta shouted loudly, "Is anyone there? Is Master Troy here?" Who, with a dull and hoarse voice, an old man with trousers covered with sawdust walked out of the room. "I found Olaf and others." The old man said 3 sentences in Dutch, German, and English, but everyone did not understand. Olaf replied in Danish and Latin. The old man let out a sigh and said in his half-baked Danish, "It turns out to be a friend from the north." "Why? Did you ask me to make a windmill? I have built more than a dozen windmills on your Danish peninsula in Jutland workshop." Jutland is a peninsula in northern Germany. It belongs to Denmark as a whole. It is regarded as the largest piece of land in Denmark. It faces the North Sea to the west. Therefore, the cold current from the North Sea has a long period of conservative strong winds on the west coast. In order to take advantage of the wind, Denmark has also built constructions on the west coast. Many windmill workshops after Valeta, who had been to Denmark, whispered to Olaf and Olav. The two understood that this Troy could be invited by Danish officials to make a windmill, which shows that he is really a master. "Hello, Master Troy, we want to buy a windmill and watermill equipment, and we want to go back to China to install it on our own. I wonder if you can make it." Olaf stepped forward and asked politely. Troy seemed to be well informed. He was not surprised that a teenager of Olaf came to speak. He smiled kindly and said, "Hello, young master. I can do windmill equipment and water wheel equipment, but you must have specifications, such as how old. But I'm worried that if you take the equipment back and install it in place, if something goes wrong or it doesn't work, then blame me for selling you a fake guy. We need ordinary windmills like ours near the Dutch coast. If you are worried about a poor installation, can you please advise my servant? I can pay you extra." Olaf thought about Troy and said it was right. Said after discussing with Olaf. Troy thought for a while and nodded, "Okay. But it takes 10 days to make 2 sets of equipment. You can let your subordinates study in my factory these days, but I can't guarantee to teach them." "This will do." Olaf nodded and smiled. "Thank you for your generosity." After a while, Olav and Troy settled on 2 watermill and windmill equipment at a price of 16,000 dongs. Troy said that he needed to purchase wood and iron processing parts to make equipment for Olav, and that the money was required to be settled in advance. Non-financing is the characteristic of this era, because the buyer's demand is greater than the seller's. Olav could only agree. And then Troy sent an apprentice to invite the associate of the Windmill Guild to testify. Olav and Troy signed a commission agreement. The association's associate also signed the deposit, and Olav paid 16,000 dongs. Check the contract is in triplicate. The purchase of windmills is different from the shortage of food, so the buyer does not need to pay taxes, but Olav saved a lot of money among the white slaves on the boat. There are 3 or 4 people who have carpentry and mason skills. After all, they are born from poor people and are always versatile. Olaf and Olav wanted to send them back to find Troy to learn, so as not to bring back to Wendland to install. But it's disgusting. It was already afternoon when I returned to the pier. The church bell in the distance told everyone that it was the 4th hour, and it would be dark after another half an hour. Olaf remembered that he should be able to buy the most advanced timekeeping tool in Amsterdam now, the self-ringing bell, so he was ready to look for it in the store when he was free tomorrow, and buy a few self-ringing bells. He was numb to the life of estimating time, or I miss the days when there are watches. After all, there are clocks and watches to have an accurate concept of time. On the way, Olaf, Olav and others found a restaurant to eat some pork patties and boiled mussels, so they were not hungry when they returned to the boat. Hudik and Hagrid had already returned to the ship. Olav and Olaf reported on today's situation to the 2 people. Hudik nodded and said, "You did a good job. As expected, you are all on your own. You deserve to be the son of Heir." Hagrid also praised the two men hesitatingly, and then said, "Me and Hudic have also gone through all the procedures. Our fur goods and royal jelly are listed for sale in the afternoon. It is estimated that someone will find it tomorrow." After all, beaver leather is a tight item, seemed to be for Hagrid's words. His voice fell short, and a man's voice sounded outside, speaking in Danish. "Are Mr. Hagrid and Mr. Hudic here? I am a friend of Mr. Putman's, here to buy goods." Hagrid and Hudic got up hurriedly to go outside. Olaf asked, "Who is Putman's?" Hudic replied casually, "It is the manager of the exchange. When we got the tax card, he knew we were going to sell skins, so he said that he would introduce someone to him. I didn't expect it so soon." After a while, Hudic and Hagrid led a man in a dark green woolen trench coat into the room. "Mr. Kieran, please sit down." Hagrid invited the man to sit down www.wooxiaspit.com and accompanied him to the seat. "I heard Mr. Putman say that you have skins on your boat. Can you see if the leathers are good? I think I will buy them all." Kieran looked at his 40s or 50s, his face was well earned, and he asked eagerly as soon as he sat down, "This style and image look like an agent of a big man." Hagrid and Hudic felt like they suspected that he might be Putman's subordinates, but no matter who buys things, they are customers. "Please wait a moment." Hagrid nodded, and instructed Piku to get a skin, as well as skins, wolf skins, etc. After a while, Piku and a white slave sailor came in with the leather goods. Seeing the unique luster of skin, Kieran couldn't help but stand up to take it, touched it and smelled it. "It's this year's new leather, okay. This kind of leather is really good." Kieran picked up the wolf skins and looked through them again, all was admiring them. Putting down the furs, Kieran sat back in his seat with a serious face, and said to Hagrid without squinting his eyes, "Mr. Hagrid, your leather is very good. The only flaw is that the leather workers' methods are too rough, but the whole is still top grade. How many goods do you have?" 44 skins, 30 skins, 30 mink skins, 6 bear skins, 12 white wolf skins, 16 fox skins, and 52 squirrel skins." Speaking of his own leather goods, Hagrid is very precious, and then asked, "What price can Mr. Kieran offer?" "I hope to buy at the price of previous years. In Amsterdam, the price of skins is generally around 400 guilders, which is already higher than other regions. However, in recent years, skins are getting less and less. I can give you 460. The price of Dutch guilders. As for the price of skins, it is lower." Yes. Chapter 60, Good Things Don't Worry About Selling. Corink is worthy of being an old businessman, with a loyal and honest face, and then he gave a good price in a persuasive manner. In fact, the leather of this grade in Amsterdam is enough to sell for 500 guilders, but Hagrid and others do not want to delay too much time, and at the same time, the price of 460 guilders is already higher than that given by the Governor of Dublin and Lord Bowles. "Okay, sir, it's your price." Hagrid discussed with Olaf and Hudic for a while, and then agreed to Kirink's offer. "May God bless you, sir. You are really an excellent businessman and navigator." Kirink complimented Hagrid uncontrollably, and then took out the check and the agreement to fill out. After Hagrid signed and confirmed that it was correct, Kirink picked up an agreement and put it in his pocket, and said, "Tomorrow morning is Friday, and the bank will go to work. Please Mr. Hagrid to wait on board." After confirming that the check is correct, I will personally bring people to pick up the goods." Hagrid glanced at the string of zeros on the check, nodded, and smiled. "I don't dare to care about the big bill of 220,000. As long as the check can be discounted tomorrow morning, it will be no problem to send it to your house. Please don't worry about this. The credibility of the Cunning firm is also well known throughout the Netherlands, and we will not do anything dishonorable," Cunning said solemnly. "Yes. The reputation of the Kieran firm has always been very good," Hagrid agreed casually, and then remembered that there are really not many powerful merchants such as Kieran. If you don't catch him, the royal jelly may be sold for a long time, so he recommended, "Our royal jelly is also the top ingredient in desserts, and it has medicinal value. Don't you want some?" "Oh," Kieran raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, "I have always been curious about what royal jelly is. Since your excellency has spoken, please let me open my eyes." Piku took out a half can of royal jelly from the side. "This is the half can of Olaf." Olaf and others drank sugar water, opened the lid and smelled the sweet scent and finally a hint of fragrance. Kieran smiled and said, "Can I taste it?" "Of course you can," Hagrid said, handing over a spoon. "It's delicious. This kind of royal jelly is indeed different from ordinary honey, and the fragrance is also unique. At least I haven't eaten any dessert with such a refreshing fragrance. I think it will be favored by big people." Kieran took a bite, then took out the handkerchief, wiped the spoon, and returned it to Hagrid. He asked, "Does royal jelly come from?" "What is the price of a gallon?" Hagrid looked at Olaf. Olaf gave a wink, so Hagrid shaped the royal jelly into a treasured dessert with mysterious and primitive colors according to Olaf's words, and then the price was the same as the white sugar from the heavens. Since only Daming can produce white sugar at present, in Europa, white sugar is a rare and precious dessert, much more expensive than honey. Yes, if royal jelly is a treasure from Siberia, it is also worth a price. Kieran thought for a long time, and finally nodded, but royal jelly is a new thing after all. "Mr. Jack, you can be a third cheaper. I think you can buy more." Olaf originally planned to sell at the price of honey. The price of 2/3 of sugar is actually slightly higher than that of honey. He thought about it and nodded to Hagrid. "Yes. There are still 40 or 50 cans on my ship. I want it." Hagrid agreed and signed another contract after negotiating an agreement with Cunning. The amount written on the check received this time is 60,000 guilders, worth £3,000 after Cunning left. Hagrid handed the check to Olaf and said, "You made £7,000 by selling royal jelly." "Tisk, it's amazing." Olaf was thrilled. He knew that the £7,000 in this period was not the 80,000 soft coins a few hundred years later, but it was actually £7,000 in silver. £7,000 is equivalent to more than 70,000 and nearly 80 taels of silver in Ming. Although it is only a small amount of money for the real rich of Ming or Europa, it is also equivalent to the entire net worth of a small businessman. When the East India Company was first established 28 years ago in the United Kingdom, the company's capital was only £72,000, but it was raised by more than 100 people. Of course, investors invested small amounts of money, but this also showed that £7,000 is worth a lot. A cow is only £4, and a pure Shire horse is less than £9, and a villa in central London is only £3,000 or £4,000. Of course, there is no concept of house speculation, and the price is not high in any case. Olaf's income this time is worth the original Hader's 2 or 3 decades of planting and grazing in Iceland. Luxury goods are the most profitable at any time. Olaf was also satisfied with his income, so he added a purchasing plan to the original plan. Olaf originally wanted to earn his first pot of gold from maple syrup, and then took the money to buy a boat and dozens of his own white slaves. The budget was more than 4,000 marks, but now he earns more than 13,000 marks. Olaf is as good as buying an armed merchant ship directly, and then buying some cannons, so that he can also have an armed. The next morning, Hagrid took Olaf with him to the bank, and arrived at the counter after a candle was burned. After verification, the 2 checks were both authentic and valid, and then they were redeposited into Hagrid's account. Hagrid applied for 10 more checks, and then left with Olaf. Going back to the ship, I happened to meet Kieran with his servants and vehicles waiting. After a few words of greeting, he began to carry the fur and royal jelly. After waiting to send Kieran away, Old Bud arrived with a few carts of food. At this time, Olaf also came back. In the morning, he sent sailors to learn how to assemble windmills from Troy, and it was now after a turn. Seeing that the sun was already rising high, it was estimated that it was almost noon. Olaf ordered the sailors to carry food and couldn't get out of them. Olaf and Hewdick took Olaf to the shipyard. To buy a ship, there are countless shipyards at the Dutch wharf. When you come out of the berthing area, cross the bridge and then go east, you will see a big river. You reading www.uucanchu.com. This is the Zan River, which leads to the canals extending in all directions in Amsterdam to the west. And the Grand Canal that runs through the North Sea. Habai Bank is a row of large factories. Most of them have their doors open, and some have basically shaped wooden boats pulled out. Standing outside, you can see the windmills and tall winch cranes in the shipyard. Olaf walked in later. I realized that the windmill used the coastal wind to create power to make logging and sawing wood, which were used to make boat boards. You can't carelessly buy a ship. Several people have left 4 or 5 houses in a row. They all asked about the situation. They were basically the same, except that there were almost no existing ships. Even if 1 or 2 ships were too small, they did not meet Hagrid's requirements. If it is made to order, it will take 3 days at the earliest if the materials are ready, and it will take more than 10 days if there is no material after a round. Hagrid decided to wait for the best, so after discussing it, he went to De Groot Shipyard, a medium-sized but large-scale shipyard. The reason why the ship was booked at De Groot Shipyard was because other shipyards advertised that their shipyards had built merchant ships for the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, But the staff of the Groot shipyard told Hager and others, their chief shipbuilder, Mr. Henrik Hubbert, built a warship for the Nordic Lion Gustav I in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, that is a warship named Vasa, the flagship of the Swedish King Gustav I to form the navy. In the future, it will rely on it to lead the powerful Swedish navy to defeat Poland and Denmark and dominate the Baltic Sea. With this example in the front, the warship naturally went to De Groot shipyard, so Hagrid paid a deposit of 38,000 guilders and ordered 3 armed merchant ships and 1 mixed-sail merchant ship, one of which was the Austrian armed merchant ship. Rafts. Chapter 61, Visit Big Shots. Dutch shipbuilding is currently leading the world. The cost of the same ship in London and Denmark is 30%–40% more expensive than Amsterdam. This is due to labor and technology issues. The ship type and the convenience of putting it into use at the same time are also the #1 ship in the Netherlands. At least a large ship with the same displacement. The British and Danish ships need 17 or 8 sailors, but the Dutch ships need 12 sailors. So even businessmen from big shipbuilding countries like Britain and Denmark will come to the Netherlands to order ships in order to save money. This is the core competitiveness of the Netherlands. Hagrid ordered the ship, and Hagrid asked about the artillery, preparing to install cannon artillery on the 2 armed merchant ships. The owner of the shipyard, Mr. Arend Degret, told Hagrid that the shipyard had no right to sell artillery guns, but also quietly told him that he could visit the directors of the East India Company, and anyone had the right to sell the artillery to Hagrid. And guns, he can refer on his behalf, but doing so requires a lot of money. There is nothing you can't buy in the Netherlands. The words of the shipyard owner De Groot made Hagrid, Olaf and others understand, and then asked him to introduce them on his behalf. So in the afternoon, De Groot took Hagrid around in the south of Amsterdam, spent thousands of guilders to buy porcelain and oil paintings, and then sent them out. Finally, one of them replied, which is in charge of the East India Company, the director of personnel scheduling, he only has time tomorrow morning, so Hagrid will visit him tomorrow morning. Hagrid and the others were relieved that this matter was done well. They knew that if everything went well, the director said in a word that the artillery, muskets, plate armor and other weapons and equipment that everyone needs would not be a problem. In the next morning, Hagrid and Hudic put on decent windbreakers and top hats, took 4 sailor servants and mink as souvenirs, and followed De Groot to visit the directors of the East India Company. Because the leather goods carried in the cabin are expensive, they are sold in their entirety. The remaining leathers that were badly damaged during hunting can't be bought for the price. Hagrid is going to leave and take them back to make a scarf for his sister-in-law and other relatives. Now he will visit. The big man just picked the best mink and 3 squirrel belts and passed by. Hagrid and Hudic went to visit the big shots, while Olaf and Olaf took people to buy pottery pots, cloth, wool, paper, pen, leather and other materials, needles and threads, kitchen utensils and other living utensils, as well as various melons, fruits, vegetables and grain seeds. I bought dozens of cars in a mess for less than 3,000 guilders. When passing by a musical instrument store, Olaf saw a girl holding a boxy piano box playing. The melodious music made people feel comfortable to hear. After inquiring, I found out that it is Henken. Like the harp, it is a traditional instrument derived from Northern Europe, but now there are very few players. The reason why Olaf pays attention to the square harp is at first glance like the traditional guzheng and guqin. The Chinese musical instruments are somewhat similar. Seeing that he liked it, Olaf spent more than 40 guilders, bought a harp and a henken, and prepared to put them in his room as ornaments. And he could learn musical instruments if he had the opportunity. After coming out of the musical instruments shop, Olaf saw another watch shop. Because of the remoteness of Iceland and the lack of information, even wealthy people don't have clocks. The timekeeping is still the most traditional church 8-hour timekeeping. After more than 10 years of life, Olaf has forgotten that there are such things as clocks in the world, so he became very interested and walked in to watch. Olaf also followed in and watched. Everyone saw all kinds of clocks hanging on the wall and on the table. They were of different sizes, all engraved with various patterns, including lions, flying dragons, gods, and so on. But what made Olaf rush to the surprise is that most clocks have only 12 icons, very few with Latin numbers, and these clocks are all self-ringing clocks. There is no huge pendulum clock like later generations. Olaf asked the owner of the watch shop to find out that watches have been invented for 100 years, but they have been inaccurate. In recent decades, there have been more accurate self-ringing bells. Every hour, a character bell will pop up to tell the time. Neon is very popular and is an indispensable item in the homes of merchants and nobles. Seeing that Olaf liked it very much, Olaf bought 2 chimes with animals and Catholic saints. First he paid 200 guilders in pain, then turned his head and smiled at Olaf. You can bring these 2 chimes home to play. Right, Olaf knows that for Icelanders, it is useless to calculate time accurately in hours, because their life pace is slow and they have long developed the habit of watching the sky and timekeeping, but his soul, as a 21st century man, has a concept of time, so I didn't refuse, and happily accepted the cherished gift from his brother Pick, who walked out of the watch shop behind Olaf with 2 heavy self-ringing bells on his back. Olaf looked at the sky and prepared to go back soon. Olaf frowned and asked, the cargoes of both ships are now cleaned up. Shall we not buy some cargo? Isn't the Scottish party going to run empty? Olaf heard his brother's doubts and explained with a smile, we handled a large amount of dried cod and wine in Dublin, but we didn't buy anything when we left. That's because there was nothing to eat from Dublin. We bought food from Dublin and sent it to the Baltic Sea and Iceland to make money. Going to Amsterdam, a grain-producing area, the Dutch grain production is not high, but it belongs to the processing and transit area, and the price of grain is cheap and stable. We only lose money, so we ran out of Holland. But when the 4 of our ships are built, when the 6 large ships leave Amsterdam, they will be loaded with spices, sugar, Dutch hemp, flour, and beer to go to Scotland. Scotland is not as wealthy as England, but because the last British king was born to the son of the Stuart family of Scotland and the Princess of England, England has entered the Stuart dynasty since the predecessor James I of England. When citizens have become a region with almost the same status as England, taxation and squeeze are already in heaven and underground compared to Ireland. In other words, the economic conditions in Scotland have improved a lot, and our spices, sugar, linen cloth, flour, and beer are all in short supply in Scotland, so we don't have to worry about selling them. Olaf's words made Olaf understand the complexity of doing business in the maritime age. www.uxiaspit.com. Sometimes I would rather run away than buy useless goods. This reminds Olaf of the game he played in his youth called The Great Sailing Era, where he drove a boat to do business in various European countries, and sometimes he was able to fight pirates, which was quite interesting. Starting in the afternoon, the workers of the firm took a wagon to deliver all kinds of goods to the dock. After Olaf checked a number of varieties, the sailors moved them into the cargo hold. When the sailors were busy with the workers, the sun gradually shifted to the west, and Hagrid and Hudic returned with the Valettu, Hilt and others with smiles on their faces. It's done, Olaf asked. It's done. The adult agreed. Hagrid nodded and said, Degrati didn't say the identity of the adult mysteriously at first, but after I came out, I learned that he was visiting South Holland. Member of Parliament, Mr. Franson, this is one of the best in the Dutch Republic. After Hudic passed the list up, he told me that everything we want will be delivered in half a month. Okay, Olaf laughed, then remembered something, and asked in a low voice, is the price high? Of course. Hagrid curled his lips and shrugged. Hudic said coldly, 250,000 guilders. What do you think? Hiss. Olaf and Olaf took a breath at the same time. If you don't count Olaf's 7,000 British pounds from selling royal jelly. In fact, Hagrid and Olaf made more than 3,000 gold marks from selling skins and other skins, dried fish, and wine. If you save them all, it's 350,000 Dutch guilder. But buying artillery and guns and other equipment can cost more than half of it, which is really unexpected. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62, Go to Scotland. After a few people walked into the cockpit and sat down, Olaf asked, What did you buy? Uncle, 36 32-pounder guns, 18 9-pounder guns, 300 matchlock guns, 500 plate armors, more than 100 crossbows, 500 swords and spears each, and more than 200 boxes of ammunition. This is the most artillery and plate armor. It's expensive. After all, it is made of pure iron. Hudic took out the first purchase order transcript from his arms, read the number on it, and said with emotion, these guns are enough for 3 armed merchant ships, heavy artillery attacks, and small artillery harassment. There are also a lot of matchlock and plate weapons. Olaf was a little surprised at Hagrid Hudic's mastery. That's too expensive. Olaf worries about the dry money bag. It's not expensive anymore. Hagrid grinned. Mr. Franzen said that apart from the new artillery, many of the other weapons and equipment were used by the Dutch soldiers. Although they can be used, they are a little worn out, if not now. There is no war with Spain, and it won't be cheaper for us, hey. More than 200,000 guilders. Olaf is still very distressed, but Olaf frowned and said, we will have the opportunity to have our own weapon production line in the future. It will not last long to buy. How many people are there now? Thinking too far, Hudik pursed his lips, but his eyes also contained longing. Olaf nodded, yes. Thinking far, let's slowly accumulate strength first. The various groceries purchased by Olaf were not cleaned until noon the next day. Then Olaf and Olaf wandered around the Amsterdam market all day and saw a lot of peculiar sights, such as the divination and magic of the gypsies. Performances include Arab magic, snake training and monkey training, etc. At the same time, I saw a lot of goods from the Far East. They were all familiar to Olaf, but most of the porcelain was rough in workmanship and the cloth patterns were not beautiful enough. It was obvious that they were all commonplace goods. After 9 days, Troy took the apprentice to send the windmill and water wheel components to the dock, and gave Olaf a hand-drawn installation drawing. Although your sailor is stupid, he is still diligent. According to this drawing, you can make windmills and water wheels. By the evening of the 10th day, an armed merchant ship entered the port and approached the Thorshammer. A group of people in a hurry, dressed in black cloaks, stood on the deck. Hearing the movement, Hagrid and Hudik thought they were robbers. They rushed out with a weapon and a sailor. They stopped when they could see the people on the ship clearly, picked up the flag and gestured twice, and a black cloak on the opposite deck also took out a flag. There was a semaphore. The delivery is here, Hagrid sighed, and then directed the sailor to write over a plank. The individuals who came out of those black cloaks said a few words to Hagrid, and then began to carry the huge and heavy wooden boxes from the cabin. More than a dozen people carried one box, but only 2 were carried out at a time. Hagrid and Hudik opened them one by one and found that they were all guns, plate armor and other weapons, and more than 80% were brand new. Moved to our boat. The sailors lifted the boxes on the deck and moved them into the Thorshammer along the board that was connected to the side. When the weapons of a dozen large boxes were finished, the black cloak brought out another 30 or 40 large and small boxes, which were relatively lightsome. Hagrid opened his mouth and saw that he recognized the iron cannons he had bought. Each of these 36-pound guns weighed 600 to 700 pounds. With wheels, they had to weigh dozens of pounds. The 9-pound guns were much lighter. When the sailors had all carried the artillery and ammunition, it was already in the middle of the night when one lie was silent. Standing on the deck, only the sound of waves hitting the hull could be heard. The leader in the black cloak came out, followed Hagrid into the cockpit, accepted the check for 250,000 guilders by candlelight, and then nodded and left. Hagrid and Hudik sent the sailor to sleep. They both touched and looked at the cannon, and it took a long time before they fell asleep. When he got up the next day, Hagrid personally drove the boat to the north shore of the port, sailed into the Zan River, and stopped at the gate of De Grati shipyard. De Grati sent people to push the pulley crane to hoist the cannon down, and prepare to install it in the gun chambers on both sides of the armed merchant ship. Hagrid was staring at the 4 ships that were about to be completed in the shipyard, while Olaf and Olaf went to buy goods. After all, buying ships and weapons was about to run out of money, and you should never go to Scotland again. Hagrid's 350,000, except for the money for food, windmills, water wheels, and weapons and equipment, is only less than 70,000. However, the cost of 2 armed merchant ships and a mixed sail clipper is 55,000 guilders, and there is one more ship. Olaf paid for the 20,000 guilders for the armed merchant ships, so Hagrid actually only had 15 guilders left. Olaf saw his uncle's embarrassment and lent him most of his 7,000 pounds, so Hagrid had the money to let Olaf buy the goods. The Thorshammer was loaded with weapons and equipment, and the Hope was a ship full of grain. The remaining 4 new ships were 3 armed merchant ships with a tonnage equivalent to that of the Hope Thor, but because they were equipped with artillery, as a result, the space has been reduced by 1/3, and the cargo capacity has been much reduced compared to before the renovation. The mixed sail clippers are one size smaller than these large ships. They are mainly used for fishing and near-sea cargo. Olaf bought it because it is convenient to use in Wenland. It is not only more convenient for fishing, but also up the river. After entering the island, it will be used as a quick means of transportation for troop carriers to deal with the wild people in the future. Around 50,000 guilders. Olaf bought 100 pounds of first-class spices and 270 pounds of second-class spices. www.wuxiaspit.com and spent 50,000 guilders to buy a lot of linen. beer and 20 bags of granulated sugar. More than 5,000 pounds were spent cleanly, and the remaining money bought enough water for the sailors on the 5 ships. When Olaf finally returned Hagrid's purse, there were only more than 8,000 guilders exchanged from the Bank of Amsterdam, seeing that the heavy coins are all silver coins, but they are only worth 400 pounds. On the morning of June 2nd, after everything was ready, Hagrid submitted the tax plate and asked the staff of the exchange to check the various contracts and the procedures issued by the port. After that, he obtained the departure documents and handed them to the port management staff. Later, I got a pass, and then the 5 ships slowly left the port under the helm of Hagrid, Olaf, Hudic, Hilter, and Valentu, and left Amsterdam all the way to the north under the control of the sailors. Inland sea there are Dutch ships blocking the way near the West Frisian Islands, and only ships leaving the port are allowed to leave the port of Helder. This port is the only port in the north that enters and exits Amsterdam. It was blocked by the Netherlands to form a checkpoint. 5 large ships were stopped when they reached Helder port. After docking, a Dutch navy checked the departure documents before releasing them. This was to prevent tax evasion and smuggling of ships. Led by the Hope, 3 armed merchant ships followed in an arrow shape, enclosing the Thorhammer and the mixed sail clippers. 5 ships left the Helder checkpoint and entered the North Sea. They adjusted their directions and withdrew their full sails. The sails bulged under the action of the sea breeze and pushed the fleet to the northwest. At noon the next day, the fleet entered the Gulf of Forth on the east coast of Scotland. This is a large trumpet-shaped bay. About 100 nautical miles west, it is the former capital of the Kingdom of Scotland. Now the United Kingdom of England, Scotland and Ireland governs the Scottish region. The capital Edinburgh. Chapter 63, Scottish White Slave. Edinburgh is an ancient city with a history of hundreds of years as the royal capital. In the center of the city is the royal capital of Edinburgh. The entire pattern of Edinburgh is the spiderweb radiating outwards with the ancient castle as the core. After entering the port of Edinburgh, the fleet docked in accordance with the guidance of the flag bearer. Then the staff of the Seaport Management Committee asked about the purpose and origin of the fleet. After learning that the goods were to be sold, the staff directly led Hager to the Management Committee to register, and issued a tax license for him. The procedures are complete, and the fleet can be listed for sale on the Edinburgh Exchange. So Hagrid and Olaf went to the exchange to find merchants to prepare to sell the goods. Hudic took a few people to find a Scottish landlord living in Edinburgh, planning to recruit dozens of Scottish white slaves. Actually, with the current state of Ireland, even if it requires 1,000 or 2,000 people, it is very easy, because people in Northern Ireland can't live happily, and even take the initiative to find a way out to sea. But Hader and Hagrid are not fools. They are worried that there are too many white slaves in the Irish area, and they will cling together, and then they will not cooperate with their leadership at the slightest level. Therefore, in order to contain the Irish white slaves and balance the power, it is necessary to recruit some Scottish white slaves during the severe winter. Olaf listened to Hader, Hagrid, Olaf and others discussing this issue by the fireplace at home. He always felt that Hader and the others were considering the right question. There are now more than 200 white slaves in Wenland, of which about 150 are Irish white slaves, while the number of Scottish white slaves is only over 30. Hagrid and Olaf rely on 4 or 5 Icelanders and 10 who brought to Wenland from their homes. Several white slave militiamen managed more than 200 white slaves and more than 200 wild men, and there has been no problem, because the number of white slaves is still small, and Hagrid has a gun in his hand and is very brave and violent, treats others boldly. White slaves. There is no other idea at all, but if the white slaves get bigger and bigger, there is no guarantee that there will be no strange thoughts in life. By that time, the number of white slaves far exceeds the few Icelanders and dozens of militias managed by Hagrid, which is very dangerous because Hagrid took this into consideration. When choosing white slaves, the focus was on people with families and honest duties. Now that Hader brought more than 100 Icelanders to join, the leadership's strength has greatly increased and become dozens of times stronger. With the backing of the people of Harrod village, Hagrid estimates that it can add another 500 to 800 whites. The slaves could not shake the leadership of the Icelanders. However, in order to weigh the strength and not allow the white slaves to form a group with rural relations and friendship, it is still necessary to recruit some Scots, so as not to give Vinland to only the upper-class Icelanders and the lower-class Irish white slaves, because this kind of social situation is very unstable, and there is an outbreak of contradictions, which is infighting or even infighting if the Scots are enriched. Vinland's social members are the Harrod family at the top and the Icelanders at the top, the white slave militia at the middle, the Irish and Scottish white slaves at the bottom, and the savage slaves at the bottom. This previous division can reduce the possibility of Irish white slaves grouping together, and if Scottish white slaves and Irish white slaves are mixed into teams, even if there are many Irish white slaves in each team, it will not be able to form a whole. After was listed for sale, the fleet's cargo sales were not optimistic because in an ordinary or even backward area like Scotland, luxury goods like spices and sugar are not easy to sell, so every merchant only bought a little. Moreover, the strength of Scottish merchants is limited. Even grain, beer, linen, etc. can only buy goods from dozens of pounds to 1 or 200 pounds. Hage, Hudic and others seemed to be prepared for this situation, so every day one person would go to the exchange to find a buyer, and then others would wait for various merchants to continue to pick up goods on the ship with peace of mind. The mountains of cargo on the 5 large ships gradually decreased over time. After 3 or 4 days of rushing, the various cargoes on the 5 ships were finally distributed after the 28 Scottish merchants boarded the ship and inspected the goods. The batches sold out, except for the 30,000 pounds of unhusked barley, wheat, and rye that we left behind. All other grains, beer, etc., have been processed. I simply calculated it. A total of 7,800 pounds was sold, which is a profit of 2,500 pounds. In the cockpit, Hagrid counted the big and small gold and silver coins in the money box, and finally smiled and looked at Olaf. Here is your 5,500 pounds. Uncle doesn't use your money in vain. After buying the boat, Olaf lent the remaining 5,000 pounds to his uncle to purchase the goods. Now he earns 10% interest directly, grinning and saying, I will give you a meal tonight, roast pig, roast leg of lamb. How? Okay. Master is so generous. Piku applauded and cheered, and he couldn't help but praise his master. There will be white slaves here tonight. Hudic has already selected them. It is estimated that there will be 50 or 60 households. Hagrid chuckled lightly. This Scottish landlord and seller are more ruthless than Ireland. The landlord started together and helped us find hundreds of farmers, one for only £4, and 20% of the tax. These Scottish farmers thought that they were recommended by the masters to go to the New World to make money. Little did they know that the land in their hometown would be taken away by these benevolent lords the moment they left Edinburgh. Hagrid has never sympathized with the poor Scots and Irish. Olaf always thought he was a cruel hero who only valued his family and friends and his subordinates, so he was not surprised to hear his uncle's mocking words. I heard Big Brother Hudic say that in England, the people of the West India Company often recruit farmers and poor people in the city to get rich in West India. The deception method is 100 times more powerful than ours. Valley tried to make fun of it. Said really, Hilter, who was born as an orphan in England, has always had a good memory of his hometown after being beautified. He asked Valentau's words that it was hard to accept. This is still false? Brother Hudic listened to the nobles in Scotland. Valentu snorted coldly. Little Shilt, you are still young and don't understand the abhorrence of nobles. Uncle Valentu will not cheat you. An hour passed quickly, because the saint in the cockpit rang the bell. Olaf glanced at the time at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. When the sky was getting darker in the summer in England, it won't get dark until after 7 o'clock, but the sun begins to set at 6 o'clock. 2 horse-drawn carriages with exquisite reliefs suddenly appeared on the pier. The people who drove were all well-dressed. At first glance, they looked like a rich or expensive family. There were hundreds of Scots behind the carriage and followed closely with their children. After a while, the carriage stopped and Hudic, wearing an old but stiff military uniform, got out of the first car, and then helped the second car to open the door. A fat, short man walked down in the second car. He had a beard that diverged in the middle and curled up on both sides, and he was holding a walking stick. Hagrid had already taken Olaf and walked off the boat quickly, first shook hands with the short man, and then smiled. Mr. Ramos, why are you here in person? Olaf stood on the deck quietly observing the scene of the harbor. Hearing Hagrid's address to the short man, he remembered that he and Hudic had said that he had helped them coordinate relations with other landlords and helped recruit white slaves. Mr. Moss, it is said that this person is our local landlord and big businessman in Scotland, and he is very keen on any business that makes money. Don't worry if I won't come. www.wooksiaspit.com. We have worked together many times. Hagrid, you are my good friend. How can I not come and watch it in person? Ramos said with a smile, knowing the virtues of this old boy. Hagrid sneered in his heart. Are you afraid that your servants will take the money and run? You are not worried about money, Hudic. How many households is this? Looking at Hudic, Hagrid asked. There are 126 people in 66 households, Hewdick blurted out without hesitation. Hagrid nodded, then turned his head and said, Walletu, you can get £264 from the cabin. Wait until Valet took a purse and handed it to Hagrid. Hagrid checked it in front of everyone before handing it to Ramos. Ramos knows that the penny is not bad, so he took out a bundle of sales deeds from his arms. These are sales documents signed by 126 people, and the content is that the person bought the ferry ticket out of his own will. Going to West India to live, but because I have no money to buy a ferry ticket, I am willing to work for the contract owner for 6 years free of charge. The position of the signature is all crooked letters. This is because most farmers and poor people have low educational level and are even illiterate, so some can only write the initials of their own names, and some write an initial instead, and the letters of is not written. It is written by relatives and friends. The ancient Oriental country's handprint painting method is not used by Westerners, so it is basically replaced by drawing letters. Ramos handing over this lot of deeds to Hagrid is equivalent to giving Hagrid the wealth, lives and management of the 126 people on the dock, and what Hagrid paid was only the 264 that was handed over to Ramos. The pound sterling will give the white slave a piece of land a few years later. May God bless you, my friend. Ramos put away the purse with joy, then shook his hand with Hagrid and got in the car and left. Chapter 64, Return Trip. After Ramos left, only the Scottish white slaves, their master Hagrid, and dozens of sailors were left on the dock. Guys, friends, you are all forced by your life to leave your hometown to open up your home in West India and find a way to survive, but you are putting the future of your family on me. I am actually under a lot of pressure, but I won't let you down. Hagrid looked at the Scottish white slave in front of him and frowned in a daze. He stepped forward and said with a throat, My name is Hagrid. I am one of the leaders of our future home. We went to West India from Iceland and built a peaceful land and a free home in 8 years of hard work. You will be very satisfied when you arrive. I can promise you that as long as you work hard and obey our arrangements, your contractual slave status will be lifted as scheduled, and it may even be possible to obtain free citizen status in advance, land, livestock and even savage slaves. After Hagrid's words were finished, a faint flame of hope and ambition began to appear in the eyes of the Scottish male white slaves, which was a manifestation of foreign yearning and igniting confidence. The female white slaves also became a little angry, and no longer held their children tightly looking around. Hagrid said a few more words of encouragement, and finally pointed to a big ship ahead, and said loudly, Now, friends, your ship to the beautiful homeland of West India is right in front. The road is ahead. For the future, please take a step and get on the boat. Hagrid finished speaking. Hewdick also instructed the sailors to come forward and guide the group of Scottish white slaves on board, and then there was no one left on the dock in less than half an hour. Because the 3 armed merchant ships are the core force, Hagrid plans to place all the white slaves on the Thor's Hammer, Hope, and the Clippers. If they can't live, then a small number of them will be placed on the armed merchant ships at Hagrid's orders. More than 100 Scottish white slaves squeezed into Thor's Hammer. Then the 5 big ships loaded with clear water and coarse grains brought some new whiskey originated in Scotland, as well as locally produced burlap and various crude tools, and then left the port. The fleet went northward in a semicircle, and then walked west from the North Sea Channel on the northern side of the island of Great Britain and Ireland to the estuary of the Foyle River in the northern part of Ireland, and headed southward, and entered the port of Delhi on the sea outside the city of Delhi in the north. Derry city is Londonderry, the capital of the later British Northern Ireland. It is still very backward and poor. At least in the simple and small port, you can see the low city walls and the houses in the distance. Delhi is much smaller and more dilapidated than Amsterdam and Dublin. At first glance, the bustling level is similar to Reykjavik in Iceland. Olaf measured in his heart that Amsterdam is similar to a water town in the south of the Yangtze River, Suzhou and Hangzhou. The canals and rivers that can be seen everywhere in the city and the degree of prosperity, commercial development, can be compared with the 2 states of Suzhou and Hangzhou. Edinburgh is like a military center in the north that has experienced warfare. Dublin is similar to the ordinary county of Ming Dynasty, although Olaf has never seen it, compared with the economic size. These 2 cities are at this level. As for Dina, there is really only a low city wall, and there are not many people in the small city inside. It looks like a town is more than a city. On the pier outside this dilapidated city, there are only a few fishing boats docked, not a large merchant ship, let alone the existence of managers. Derry is the territory of Raleigh Amor. Even the county guards in Derry are the younger generations of the Amor family, and the nephew of the owner Raleigh Amor. It looks inconspicuous here, but it is a manager of more than a dozen. The center of the county of 10,000 people. Hagrid pointed to the distant city and told Olaf aloud, "The date of our transaction with Amor is around June 5th, and it is already June 11th. Although it is already dusk, we still have to find Amor's nephew as soon as possible." Hagrid finished. He ordered the sailors to put up the planks, and then disembarked with Hudic after 2 hours. They returned to the boat until it got dark. "How is it? Did you see Amor's nephew?" The Amor County Guard, Olaf, took the hats of Hagrid and Hudic and asked casually, "Cough. I see. From tomorrow, he will organize people to come. It is estimated that the more than 100 white slaves we need will be in place the day after tomorrow." Hudic had some problems with his throat before, and he recently fell ill, so he coughed a few times before speaking. At noon the next day, people from the Amor family led farmers, handicraftsmen and other civilians in Northern Ireland to the port. Hudic and Hagrid selected on the spot. Except for 7 or 8 people who were sick, they didn't want them. The remaining 50 more than 80 people have accepted the household, and they have been placed on the Huntfin Clippers after receiving the order. Hagrid settled the pound with the Amor family according to the number of households. This kind of transaction lasted for 3 days, because the white slaves who came were all selected by the Amor family from various places, and there was always a process to come after being notified. After 3 days of selection, Hagrid and Hudic selected 81 households in 4 regions in Northern Ireland, totaling more than 260 people. Most of the 260 people were assigned to the Hope and the Huntsay Clippers, and the remaining 30 odd people were accommodated in 2 armed merchant ships. Hundreds of people have joined the fleet, so that the fleet is basically full of people, but because they are selected, they are healthy and strong men, women, children and adolescents, so there is no need to worry about the possibility of infectious diseases caused by large numbers of people living together. After the final supplies, Hagrid bought some more horses and livestock, and then the fleet set sail on the morning of June 15th, starting from the port of Delhi, going north along the Foyle River into the sea, and then adjusted its position in the North Sea towards drive slowly in the direction of when it's summer. It doesn't matter if you travel from Europe to Central and South America, but when you go to North America, you have to face the warm wind from the southeast, so the boat can't get up fast. Basically, it keeps at a speed between 6 and 9 knots. The fleet approached the waters east of Wenlan after 20 days of drifting in the Atlantic Ocean. The fleet experienced strong winds, waves and thunderstorms along the way. Because the Atlantic Ocean is also covered by a hot summer climate, and the rain is more abundant than in autumn and winter, a lot of reading www.uucanchu.com had it not been for routes and nautical charts in hand, coupled with the excellent navigation skills of Hudic, Hagrid and others, the fleet would have disappeared in various sea winds and bad weather. On the afternoon of June 27th, the fleet finally appeared on the east of Vinland Island under the leadership of Hagrid. Under the sunset, the white slaves standing on the deck saw the sea not far away. 5 or 6 fishing boats lined up east and west are fishing for cod. A dark coastline with high mountain cliffs also emerged on the westernmost coastline. It is not visible to the left or right, like a piece of land instead of an island. "I saw the land, I saw the land." The dozens of white slaves on the deck kept cheering. The white slaves who had hardly ever boarded the boat were dizzy and unable to eat for the first 10 days. They just got better after 5 or 6 days, until more than 10 days later. In order to get out of the cabin and move on to the deck, Olaf was taking a nap, and he got up when he heard the noise on the deck. Pickle also heard the movement coming out of the next hut, and the master and servants also walked onto the deck. "Master Olaf, 21 days of getting a long day and night." Most of the white slaves of Thorshammer knew Olaf, and bowed their necks when they saw him come out. "Hello everyone," Olaf smiled and nodded at the crowd. The friendly smile and handsome face made the white slaves feel ashamed, and they became closer inside, especially when they saw Olaf's azure blue eyes shining with brilliance. He did not dare to straighten up. Depending on when he walked to the bow and stood still, Olaf watched the Wenlan Island in front of him getting closer and clearer. His mouth was slightly cocked, his hands opened, and he felt the sea breeze and whispered, "Wenlan, I'm back." Quotation mark. Chapter 65, Celebration Banquet. In the southeast corner of Wenlan Island, in the west valley of the Musknew River, there is a hundreds of feet high Razor Mountain, and the foot of the southeast mountain is Hadgerberg. A huge city in Pingu in front of Hadgerberg has begun to take shape. Growth City, a military city ordered by Hader since last winter. It is planned to cover more than 10 acres. In addition to Hader Fort in the center, There are also cobweb-shaped streets radiating outward. The outermost streets of the streets are next to each other. In the east port at the mouth near river mouth, if you don't make great efforts to transform it, you can't stop the big ships, and you can't stop more than 10 big ships in Hader's final plan. The city of Herat will be home to all Vinland colonists and slaves after it is built. Even Razor Hill will be included in the city as a garden, which will eventually be enough to accommodate tens of thousands of people. However, even the white slaves and savage slaves are working hard every day. The city of Herat has only been completed less than 1,000th. The Hader fort in the center of the city can be completed in mid-June. There are more than a dozen houses around the castle, and a stone pier fence wall that is as high as one person has been pulled up outside the house. It is a simple city wall that cannot be blocked. A regular army attacked, but it was enough to resist wild beasts and primitive savages. On this day at the end of June, the city of Grote suddenly became lively. Not only the Icelanders and the white slave leaders as the management are beaming, even the white slaves and the savage slaves have also been told that the city Lord Hader will reward all the slaves with meat tonight, and it is an unlimited reward. After inquiring about the captains of the various production teams, the cheering white slaves learned that it was Master Hagrid and Master Olaf, Master Olaf, and Captain Hudic. They returned from Europa with endless goods and powerful weapons, so Hader the city lord was happy and ordered a feast in Haderborg tonight, inviting all Icelanders, white slave militias, white slave production team captains, and other distinguished figures to participate in the feast. Ordinary white slaves and savages slaves can also get enough rich food to feel joy and happiness. It didn't take long for hundreds of people to walk down on the 6 large ships docked at the mouth of the Musk Ox. Hader and Catelyn had long been waiting on the shore with yacht. Kadir, Hoskid, Hyna and others dead. Olav and Olaf hug their father and then kiss their mother's face. Hader is still fine, but Katrin is already laughing and crying, constantly kissing the 2 sons, and telling love sickness. Hagrid and Hudic also hugged and talked with Hader and others, and then ordered the sailors to move some of the linen, woolen, and whiskey they had prepared to Hader, Kadir, Hoskard, Hyna, Yada and others as gifts. The hundreds of white slaves lined up on the coast have different looks. Most of them are looking curiously and excitedly at the unique scenery on Vinland Island, and at the same time secretly worrying about the temperament of Vinland's master Hader and his own future. Hader looked around and found that most of these white slaves were pale. Knowing that they had been on the boat for a long time, many people would feel a little uncomfortable, so he asked Yad and Hyna to lead the 390 white slaves back to the city of Grote. The newly built houses were first placed for them to live, and when they regain their strength tomorrow, they would be loaned wood and stone materials to allow them to build new houses on the outskirts of the center of Grote. After the white slave left, Hader took Olaf and others on horseback back to Hader Fort. Some of the cargo and armaments on the ship were brought back to the Hugberg cave by Hoskild with 2 Icelandic production teams. The core items of Vinland were handed over to others. Hader was not relieved and could only be made by the Icelanders himself. With the removal of weapons and plates, there are ordinary linen and daily necessities. These Hader will wait until the summer has passed before giving them as rewards to Icelanders to make clothes and improve their lives. After a while back home, Tom, Halleck, Salrak, Yaluki, Harry, Val, Eriksson and others rushed to hear the news. A group of good friends met and hugged, and then Olaf gave them some exquisite and unique brooches as gifts. Several teenagers were very happy, and then began to pester Olaf with Hafengurni to tell a story about going to sea. Olaf, have you seen a siren who can sing at sea? Does it look good, brother? Have you also seen Uncle Hagrid's elephant friend? The babbled words and wild imagination made Olaf laugh dumbly, and then watching everyone's longing eyes can only play to their strengths, he made up the story casually. Of course I've seen it all. I was also chased and killed by a huge Indian tiger on board, and then I fought with it. First, Olaf opened his mouth to make the boss fool, and he described his 2-month Europa party as a fusion of juvenile fantasy drifting and Robinson Crusoe, and only surprised all the children. Face worship is only to stop in a blink of an eye. The sky gradually darkened, and then in the lobby on the first floor of Haderborg, candles made of lanolin and whale oil were lit. This time hundreds of candles were lit, and the reception hall with a radius of more than 50 steps was illuminated as if during the day. The air was still filled with a faint smell of oily burnt aroma. There are many long wooden tables in the hall. They are all tables made of oak and pine wood by the white slaves. There are also many wooden stools in front of each table. As the sky got darker and darker, cleanly dressed men and women and children walked into the hall. These people were all Icelanders. There were more than 100 villagers from the original Herat village, and 8 others were Kadir, The three families of Hoskard, Hyena, and Karm. After all the Icelanders were seated on the table in the front row, the 16 white slave production team captains also came in with their families and sat at the back table. The production team is a basic management mechanism set up by Heir and others in order to facilitate the management of Icelanders and slaves. A production team consists of 5 households with more than 10 people, and 4 teams are a large production team. There are about 20 households, and the population is about 50 people. Above, the Icelanders have set up 2 production teams, with Iad and Hoskard as the captains of the 2 production teams. And there are 8 teams under them. More than 200 white slaves have set up 4 production teams with 16 teams under their jurisdiction. The establishment of the production team strengthened Heir's management and leadership of the Icelanders and white slaves, and at the same time gave a certain degree of discipline and legitimacy to the activities of production and life. Every member of the production team must obey the team leader, and the team leader must obey the team leader. Team leader. The work efficiency has also improved a bit under the management. Heir originally wanted to set up several savage slave production teams, but considering that savage slaves should not be organized to avoid rebellion in the future, he dispelled this idea at this dinner. All the white slave captains were invited, so the 16 captains, 4 of them were part-time captains, came with their families with joy when the guests arrived. Heir, wearing a brown woolen tutu jacket and a striped thin jacket, walked down from the second floor with Catelyn in a burgundy woolen dress. The couple's dress is a luxurious dress that Olaf bought from Amsterdam. Now the status of the Heir family is different today. From now on, it will be distinguished from ordinary people in terms of dressing and being a real nobleman. Olaf and Olaf, half, wearing striped white-bottomed trousers and robes, and Gailey wearing pink ladies' tutu also followed. The people in the hall stood up and applauded under the leadership of Hagrid, Hudic, and Yacht. Then Heir looked around with a smile for a week. You read www.uucan'tchoo.com with a smile, and finally said, "Thank you for coming. We all with the joint efforts of everyone, the city is becoming rich and prosperous every day, and it will definitely be a great city in the future. This time my brother Hagrid, good friend Hudic and 2 sons Olaf and Olaf will go to Europe for business together. In exchange for the Venlin specialties we collected, they are all great heroes of our city of Grote. Tonight, please drink and eat together, and congratulate our heroes, celebrate." Everyone cheered loudly in excitement, and then Heir gave an order, and the white slave who was waiting brought out the tempting delicacies of reindeer, cod, hare, etc. that were roasted in the back kitchen, exuding a mixture of ingredients and spices. Dozens of large and small wooden racks are skewered with the golden yellow barbecues. Several white slave chefs quickly cut the barbecues with knives, and put them on the tables of Heir and other nobles with exquisite porcelain plates. To the other tabletop while the white slave chef sliced the meat, several white slave women came out with more than a dozen large earthen jars. When the lid was opened, it was wrapped in fragrant white smoke mist. There was stewed lamb with black pepper and fan. The rosemary is cooked together and has a unique fragrance. After half an hour, each table was filled with various delicacies, and the plates in front of each guest were also filled with various meats. Heir ordered a barrel of whiskey on each table. This barley has a higher alcohol content than beer and wine. Icelanders have enjoyed drinking it for the past 2 decades. Picking up a wooden cup filled with a glass of whiskey, Heir smiled and said, "Friends of Herat City. People. For our heroes. Cheers, for the hero, cheers." Chapter 66, Adden Paddlehead. The day after the celebration banquet, Heir, Hagrid and others did not get up until the afternoon when they slept, and then they gathered together to go to the Hudgerberg cave warehouse to select the best muskets and plate armor and other weapons, and prepare to equip them with Icelandic muskets. Soldiers, the core army 30 Icelandic musketeers are the most trusted subordinates of Heir and others, followed by 80 white slave spearmen. Naturally, Heir and others must take good care of the Icelanders first. On the 3rd day when Hudic returned to Grote, the training of Icelandic musketeers and white slave spearmen continued, but this time more than 100 people were wearing plate armor and equipped with the sharpest long spear and the latest matchlock. The focus of this training is to march forward and pursue the enemy. Hudic is already preparing to sweep the savages in the hinterland of Vinland Island. The current training is only to further improve the coordination of the musketeers and the spearmen, and the training of endurance time is most inconspicuous when it is busy, and it will always make people feel that time is like an arrow. It has been more than 10 days since the fleet returned to Wenland. The white slaves were organized into 66 production teams, and then divided into labor. However, Due to the large population and insufficient managers, there was a contradiction in the length of time, causing some people to continue to work. Some people have no work to do. This situation became more and more serious as time progressed. It was not until a white slave in Western Ireland was severely beaten and injured by a white slave in the north. Now the population of Groat has expanded from 600 to 1,103, and the population has exceeded 1,000. This is equivalent to the population of a county in Iceland. Iceland was first ruled by 16 Goti chiefs. Later, with a change of time, the number of leaders increased and decreased. The maximum period was 36. Large villages and towns in Iceland were formed naturally with a leader family as the core. By the beginning of the 17th century, the largest counties in Iceland were fixed at 28. This regional division continued until after independence at the beginning of the 20th century. Heir has been very excited about becoming the leader of a huge population, and even a little nervous. Now there are only more than 100 Icelanders in Groat, but there are more than 600 white slaves, and the remaining less than 200 people are savage slaves. There were more than 200, but more than 50 people died of cold in the winter, and the ranks of white slaves have grown abnormally. It's fine if there were no problems before. Now it is obvious that there is a problem in management. In order to better manage the white slaves and explore experience to colonize and manage more savages, the 6 leaders of Teth, Kadir, Heine, and Hoskard were invited to the home to discuss and adjust the management mode of Herat city. Olav and Olaf also attended the meeting. There is no experience to learn from in Iceland, and there is no country in the history of Europa that has the same situation as Herat on Vinland Island, so Heir and others have almost no precedent to follow. After drinking beer and discussing for a long time, there is still no clue. Now, almost everyone except Olaf and Heine has expressed their opinions. Heir always knew that Heine had a good head and was a high-achieving student who had gone to university in London, so he expressed his opinion. Heine has been thinking about this problem all the time. He has no political experience, but he has been a Scottish nobleman for generations. There were also a lot of manor land in his family, and he has some experience for the managers, but their family used to manage the civilians in Scotland. How to manage the society of Icelanders, white slaves, and savage slaves in the city of Herat still can't think of a very good way. But when Heir asked, Heine couldn't help but cough a little and said his immature thoughts, Uncle Heir. Now there are more than 600 people living in the city of Groat, and various problems have been constant. As for the contradictions and the problems that arise in production and life, I feel that more than half of them can actually be avoided after observation. The problem is that we have too few managers. We don't have a real mechanism for managing more than 1,000 people in Groat. Except you are the lord of the city. My father-in-law, Uncle Hoskard, Yacht, and Hudik are in charge, and there is no one to manage white slaves anymore. Although the status of Icelanders is higher than that of white slaves, they do not have the status and right to manage white slaves. Therefore, in order to better manage white slaves, we formed a production team of more than 10 people and appointed a white slave captain. Then Uncle Yacht and I, Uncle Hoskard and everyone only need to manage the 16 white slave production team captains. This method is very effective. It really facilitated us before and made the white slaves more efficient. A lot, but the problem is that the number of white slaves has now reached 600. After removing the 20 children who cannot work, the current production team has increased to 52. There are 52 production teams and 52 production teams, and there are 14 production teams and 52 teams, but we have to deal with many things with 5 or 6 managers. The ability and knowledge of more than 10 team leaders is limited, and it is not good to manage the team. While we are managing more than 10 captains, we also have to manage more than 50 teams. This is too much effort, so it is almost impossible to effectively use all the production teams in place. Yes, Heine is right. Yacht's wrinkles on his forehead seemed to deepen, frowning and said, moreover, the 52 production team captains want to do relatively more leisurely and comfortable work, so they will compete for positions and various tasks, for example, fishing and hunting, logging, and quarrying. They all want to hunt, most to log. No one wants to do the most tiring quarrying, and the team leader can't control even the same ideas as the team leader, so conflicts will arise. Due to Heine and Yacht's analysis, the situation became clearer and clearer. Heir twisted the knotted beard under his left cheek with his fingers and asked, how can these problems be solved? Everyone started to think hard, hoping to find a way. Heine said, I don't have the best way, but in order to reduce the contradiction seen by the white slave production team, We must allocate all the work reasonably www.wuxiaspit.com so that every production team can be easily assigned. Hard work, this is enough for rotation. At the same time, in order to better manage the white slave production team, we have to set up an organization above the production team and increase the number of people who manage the white slave production team. Such people must have a certain culture in mind. This idea is very good. I think it can be. Hagrid patted his head, feeling that he could not think of Hyena's idea anyway, so he nodded in agreement. Olaf is also listening to everyone's opinions, because he has no management experience in his previous life. Even if he has some ideas in his mind, he must be measured and confirmed according to everyone's words, and he will talk about it when he is ready to mature. Hoskard and Kadir also agreed with Hyena's opinion. Hader agreed on the spot. After discussion, everyone decided to emulate the adding established when the Vikings managed England, Scotland, Norway, and Denmark. A leader was set up above the white slave production team, as the OR had to manage the adding composed of 2 production teams. If such a reorganization, 600 white slaves would have 7 addings composed of 14 production teams, and then 7 Icelanders would serve as addings paddleheads to manage them. Note, adding means 1/4 of a village and the smallest living area. It can be regarded as a term used to express residential groups by land area. In the early Middle Ages, the Vikings plundered countries and were the main Viking pirates when they crossed the North Sea. As a part of combat power, the Vikings who own one adding land can master a piece of oars, become members of the Viking longship, and go on expedition with the ship. After the robbery, they enjoy a complete trophy and are respected by others. Refers to the smallest administrative area among the Viking pirates managing the Viking pirates' own land and serfs, and the oarhead is also the meaning of the master of adding. Chapter 67, Viking Rail. After discussion, in order to remove the combatants from production, the final 7 heads of oars were held by Hoskard, Hyena, Karhu, Callum, Olav, Olaf, and Yaluki. The first 5 are uncontroversial. Because Olaf enjoys the sale of more than 80 white slaves, he paid for the purchase before he paid. In addition, although he is young, he has many supernatural and extraordinary achievements, and his abilities are obvious to all, so I got an add-in. Yaluki is 16 years old this year. His father died in the mouth of the Vinland Black Bear last year. Although the family was taken care of, it was not as good as before. Hader thought of Yaluki's church school in Surshiana district. He had gone to school and achieved excellent results when he graduated last spring. Therefore, under the influence of the guilt over the death of Yaluki's father, he proposed to let him be the oarhead of adding in the name of love of talent. Although there were slight criticisms, at Hader's insistence, everyone agreed before the meeting ended. The establishment of adding and the clarification of the oarhead played an important role in the improvement of the management of Heir village and the supplement of the administrative organization. The 7 paddleheads can replace the previous 6 heads. After clarifying their responsibilities, they will lead their own add-in to work. Just report to the stewards. Hader, Hagrid, Hudic and other leaders can also be completely freed from the busy production and go on the great journey of crusade against the barbaric primitives. In order to clarify the legitimacy and consistency of management, everyone discussed for a long time, and finally agreed to the decision proposed by Hader, and established a large management team Manjufen on the 2-tier management system of the production team and add-in. Manjufen is also Icelandic, meaning man-made and managed. It is also an area controlled by paddles, that is, paddle area. In the Viking era, it was another leading organization above adding. Hader stipulated that 5 addings form 1 Manjufen. Because there are only 7 addings in the entire city of Herod, a larger Manjufen was established, with Hader as the leader of Manjufen. In fact, Hader also set up Pastor on top of Manjufen. This is the Icelandic ship area. It is a larger management mechanism than the paddle area Manjufen. However, because there are fewer people now, Pastor is only a nominal existence, and Hader still serves as the head of the ship district of Pastor. In the ancient history of Vikings, the names and positions of the management agencies from top to bottom are all related to ships. This represents the Vikings' superb shipbuilding and sailing skills, and also shows the grandeur of their expeditions and colonies on ships. Hader decided to manage the Icelanders in the same way, but because there are too few Icelanders now, he is only the nominal governor of Pastor and the head of Manju, and even the head of Aden. After all, there are only 100 Icelanders in the city now, and there is only one Aden. The population of Aden is about 100, more or less the reason why Hader was able to follow the example of the Icelanders and white slaves under the ancestor Vikings. Opponents under the control of different levels of organization leaders was actually the result of a midnight chat with Olaf last night. Olaf knows that although the area of Iceland is not too small, it has insufficient resources, sparse population, and relatively poor environment. It is not a good place. It is far from Vinland at present, but no matter how good Vinland is, it is only an island in the primitive American continent. If you want to be aggressive, you still have to go back to Europe for development, so Iceland is a place to be experienced. Olaf and Hader's initial strategic plan after unifying their thinking is to develop Vinland, use Vinland as agricultural materials as the basis for support, attack Iceland, and then use it as a bridgehead to look forward to Europa after occupying Iceland's separatist regime. The descendants of the Vikings are sturdy temperament, tall and powerful, and more than half of them have practiced ancestral martial arts since childhood, so Icelanders are the best source of troops. However, Hader and others wanted to take advantage of the 10 years before the end of the 30 Years' War on the European continent. They couldn't manage slowly. The kind of superficial development and establishment of provinces and counties, and the way of relying on free people to develop tax suitable for Vinland colonists want to quickly improve Vinland's strength, increase population and wealth. Olaf clearly realizes that his group must learn from the old wild boarskin seniors of the Far East at the same latitude. The predecessor and his son Wang Taiji quickly plundered the population of North Korea, Shandong, Zhili, Mongolia and other places with the 8-banner system, and used the 8-banner system to absorb Jurchens, Mongols, Koreans, Hans, etc., with the Manchus as the core leadership. Armored men, coded minions, etc. After the establishment of the Manchu 8 banners, they successively established a Mongolian and Han 8 banners. They divided and ruled the various ethnic groups. They also regarded their own family as the Manchurian and Han 8 banners masters, strengthened the leadership of their opponents, and finally added the right time and place. Several factors of people and harmony are tilted, and by chance, the old Loves family entered the gate and sat in the country regardless of the pros and cons of the Great Queen. Olaf now only wants the Heir family to copy the 8-banner system invented by imitating the old wild boar skin. After a winter plus a spring study, Olaf consciously realized that the system of the 8 banners variant was mature, so when he returned to Wenland, he began to brainwash his old father Hader, persuading him to agree to the Viking ancestral system against Wenland's colonial team reform. The 8 banners of Manchuria have layers of organization systems such as Gushin and Niolu, and Wenlandrit city has layers of organization such as Pastor, Manjulfin, and Aden, and all of them are managed as a family unit for all subordinates. The differences there are many, but the basic form is very similar under the management of the Manchu 8-banners system. There are also hereditary and irreplaceable slaves such as captives, foreigners, etc. who are armored and coded aha minions. These slaves are all slaves under the leadership of layers, private property. This is very Jurchen. Olaf knows that there is no way to copy it in Wenland. The so-called white slaves of Wenland are actually indentured slaves. They can only be regarded as heavily exploited subordinate laborers. And the personal freedom will be restored after the contract is completed. In Northern and Western Europe, where the serfdom system was abolished for hundreds of years, people from various countries were impacted by religious culture and cultural enlightenment, and they resisted turning into human slaves again. If Hader turns his subordinates into slaves of exploitation and squeeze by layers, and hereditary insufficiency, and his descendants are all slaves, then his leader will definitely not be able to hold him, and the mayor of Pastor will not be able to continue for a day. So Olaf changed this form after careful consideration. Although Pastor leads Manjufin, Manjufin leads Aden, and Aden leads the production team, this kind of leadership is not the master leading the slave, but similar to the governor. Leading the people is considered a form of colonization, so that leaders at all levels can seek the greatest rights within an acceptable range, while ensuring the stability of the system. On this basis, Olaf also absorbed the advantages of the 8 banners of Manchuria and the local characteristics of Wenland, and prepared to provide Wenland's unique Viking ancestral reform team with a bottom-level group of squeezable slaves, that is, the Inuit and more Indians. Olaf named the reorganized team Viking Radang. From pastor to the production team, he provided blood for the hard work of the entire Herat city and the large team. After the team captured the savages, they were assigned to every team in the team. A savage slave with a meritorious family Viking refers to people from the fjords, that is, people from Scandinavia, but an Icelandic Viking also means dare to explore at sea, So Olaf decided to use Viking as the unified Vinland. The nouns of ethnic regions of regional ethnicity leading is an Icelandic expedition. It was the first that the king of the Vikings led the region to launch an expedition. www.uxiaspit.com. The ranking of the activities organized by personnel and ships, similar to the Northern Expedition, Liberation, and Eastern Expedition of the Celestial Dynasty. And other nouns, later also generally refer to the living area of the Vikings, the people who pay taxes, and so on. Viking Thunder is a noun of the Olaf combination, which means Viking Expeditionary Corps. This system is the product of Olaf's learning from the Eight Banners system, and then a transformation with the traditionalism and the integration of local culture. In Olaf's expectation, when Viking Thunder develops and grows, it will be a country with Icelanders, white slaves and other layers of management as the core, leading and managing a large number of savages slaves. This will be the same as the one that has been established. How Manchuria was approaching. Olaf sometimes thinks that when post-King Kong was founded, there were only tens of thousands of people, and it was less than 100,000 when it became Manchuria after the integration of the populations of northeast regions such as North Korea and Mongolia, but these tens of thousands of people entered the customs for unification. He has become the master of China for more than 2 centuries. Iceland also has direct descendants of tens of thousands of Vikings. Will I be able to form a Viking nation in the future? To draw Icelanders, Irish, Scottish and other whites and even Inuit and some Indians into Vikings. And then use the Vikings. The Beijing regiment system as the core leader swept North America, unified North America to establish a new American nation, and then invaded Ireland, the 2 islands of Great Britain or Scandinavia in Europe with Iceland as a bridgehead, and became a behavioral landing in Europe. Culturally, the Viking robbers who entered the Guardian Europe went to rule that rich and beautiful expanse of land. Please remember the domain name of the book's first publication. The fastest mobile version update URL. Chapter 68. Plant potatoes. Julian calendar. On the afternoon of July 5, 1628, a patter of rain fell in the sky, making the hot air slightly cooler. Now is the Little Ice Age, whenland summer is not too hot and unbearable. A rain makes people find the feeling of the long-lost spring and autumn season. Last night's meeting to discuss the management of white slaves and the establishment of Viking Thunder did not end until midnight and quietly. Everyone in the meeting felt Hader's ambition to do a big job, and at the same time felt that Viking with a powerful energy behind the leading organization. They left Hatterborg excitedly and went back to their home for an hour or two, still tossing and turning, before falling asleep with complicated emotions. This morning, leaders such as Hader and Hagrid held a meeting with all Icelanders and white slaves on the square, announcing the establishment of Viking Thunder, then explaining related matters, and finally announcing the 7 new Adan paddle huds. Then 7 paddle huds appeared and took their respective white slaves from Adan to work according to the assigned area. The work included logging, quarrying, planting, hunting, and collecting rattan and grass. There is one more day a week to be responsible for the construction of the city of Groot. Olaf took Piku to give lectures to his 80 white slaves, and then ordered several of them to follow himself as servants, follow Piku, and then take everyone to the stone cave warehouse to fetch them. Several plant seeds and farming tools brought back from Amsterdam. Then I went to cultivate land near the river bend on the east side of Groot. The land around the city of Groot is pretty good, so hundreds of acres have been reclaimed, but the most fertile and wet East River Bend has not been reclaimed for planting, because the white slaves of Hatterborg originally planted food. Hardy rye cannot adapt to the humid environment of the river, so even if the land along the river bend has dozens of acres and is the most fertile, less than 1/10 of it has been developed. Today's social productivity is extremely low. A farmer can only grow 20 acres of land at most. Also, due to the primitive grain and insufficient soil strength, 1 acre of land can only plant less than 1 acre of plants for later generations. So in this world, it's just a matter of viewing farmland. There will be an impression Kaoshang is thin if you grow rye and oats and other grains. 1 acre, 6 acres, of land will produce more than 100 pounds per year, and the annual output of flour is less than 100 pounds. A family of several people will need 67 acres of grain a year. In addition to taxes and usual expenses, normal families have to plant more than 10 acres of land to feed the family, and their lives are still tight. Vinland has a lot of land. At present, a lot of arable land has been developed around the city of Groot. Rye and some vegetables such as radishes and beets have long been planted. With abundant cod resources, 1,000 people are absolutely self-sufficient. Not a problem, but Olaf knows that the current Western agricultural planting technology is backward and the grain cultivation technology is also primitive. The grain yield is much lower than that of Daming at the same time. Although he hopes to match the future Gong from the east. Kwu, Agricultural Policy Complete Book, etc. But before receiving these high-tech instruction books, Olaf still wanted to do something to increase woodland's productivity, liberate the large number of white slaves who were bound to the land by backward productivity, and let Iceland people and white slaves can free up their hands to do other things. Productivity is limited, and Olaf does not understand advanced agricultural technology, so after careful consideration, he decided to start with planting crops. Now, in addition to wheat, barley, rye, etc., there are crops in the woodland climate, as well as soybeans and black beans. However, the output of these crops is limited. Now in the Little Ice Age, the world's agricultural output is declining, which caused natural and man-made disasters, which caused the end of the Ming dynasty to perish. Then decades later, the prosperity of Kangxi and Qianlong was ended by the Dongfang and sweet potatoes that ended in the Little Ice River. It emerged that relying on the high yield of sweet potatoes to solve the ration problem of the people, a false prosperity was formed, and finally a population of 40,000. Olaf's gaze was on the sweet potatoes and potatoes, which are grown in both the east and the west, but they have not received much attention. When he was in Amsterdam, Olaf followed him to buy various vegetable seeds and plant seeds. He also bought some sweet potatoes and potatoes. These plants are currently mainly ornamental in Europe. Potatoes can bloom small yellow flowers, and there are still people in England eating leaves. Sweet potatoes are just pure green leafy plants. At present, some people eat rhizomes, which are sweet potatoes, but after all, it is a new thing from Latin America, and there are not many people who dare to try. Olaf clearly remembers that in the days of the Empire, 1 acre of sweet potatoes and potatoes can create a yield of 5 and 6 to 7-8,000 caddies, and that 1 acre of output is enough to feed 10 people a year without a problem. The current varieties of potatoes and sweet potatoes are naturally not as good as later generations, but it is absolutely not a problem that 1 mu can yield 1 or 2,000 caddies converted to acres. That means that 1 acre can harvest more than 10,000 pounds of ration. As long as 100 or 10 acres of potatoes and sweet potatoes can be planted, it is enough to feed everyone in Herat City, and planting 1 or 200 acres of land only needs a small production team, which can save more than 80% of the population to do other labor work, can save most of the productivity, and double the speed of the development of growth even more as the successor to the core values of socialism for decades. Olaf clearly remembers that the great leader said that population is productivity. A good party is to liberate productivity. Time and practice have proved that a great country uses decades of time to develop the population and liberate the productive forces, and build a poor and white country into the world's second largest economy. This guiding philosophy is extremely correct. Olaf now wants to develop woodland www.wuxiaspit.com to build this undeveloped virgin land, which can hardly be completed by 1,000 people, but if most of the labor force can be liberated from the land, it will be increase the speed of construction and development. Olaf personally thinks that his decision is meaningful, so he led the white slaves of Adding under his hand to the fertile and humid river bends, first instructed them to turn the soil, and then plant the cut potatoes and sweet potatoes in the soft soil, about half the depth of the palm, ask the skin to face up, and then water more than 80 by newly have an unbalanced male to female ratio, with only 1/3 of women. However, both men and women are healthy young people, ranging in age from 17 to 40, and there are only 9 young children, now except for 3 of the 9 children who are under 10, they are following Olaf, and the other 6 are also following the parents, mixing into the hands of more than 70 veterans of farming. The white slaves were led by their respective squad captains and captains to spread the ground, bury the seeds, water the ground, and the fire that consumes the most strength and energy is all made by men and strong women, thinner women and teenagers. Plant the sweet potatoes and potatoes before watering them. Olaf knows that sweet potatoes and potatoes should be planted with soil ridges. The parallel ridges are deep with sweet potatoes and potato seeds. The middle of the ridges becomes low-lying and can store rainwater after the rain. Olaf does not understand this principle, but he knew that it would make sense to plant these 2 high-yield crops with high starch content in later generations, so he also asked the white slaves to lay ridges in the way he remembered. Please remember the domain name of the book's first publication. The fastest mobile version update URL. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. we warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Set Off. Herat City is very busy every day, even in the hottest July. The rhythm of Herat City has not slowed down. Heir, Hagrid and others led the militias to conduct training every day, preparing for the upcoming raid on the woodland hinterland yacht. Hyena and others led a white slave of Adon and all the savage slaves to construct the city of Herat every day. The remaining 6 Adon white slaves are responsible for the management of a piece of cultivated lands and the collection of various materials. It can be said that in the whole city of Winlanrod, almost no one is idle. Even the children of Icelanders and white slaves are also learning characters and languages under the leadership of Olaf. Olaf taught 50 to 60 children in the morning, and went to watch the cultivation of potatoes and sweet potatoes by his white slaves in the afternoon. Piku, as Olaf's personal servant, leads the work of more than 70 white slaves around the clock. Within a few days, Olaf's white slaves cultivated 2 acres of sweet potatoes and 3 acres of potatoes. Olaf made a round of inspections and ordered the cessation of the cultivation of sweet potatoes and potatoes, because the 100 pounds he bought had already been planted, but the white slaves couldn't take time off. So they were taken by Piku to the fields outside the city every day when it was cooler, weeding and catching insects. In the era when there were no herbicides, insecticides and chemical fertilizers, the planting industry was sweat drops. Getting down to the soil is to rely on manpower to weed and catch insects in the fields every day, so as to ensure that the low-yield grain grows, shines and matures at noon. He ordered his white slaves to plant cabbage, broccoli, radishes, parsnips, coriander and watercress, on both sides of the river. Most of these vegetables have been cultivated for 100 years, and watercress is the only one. European wild vegetables, later generations in Guangdong people like to eat, so Olaf has also seen and eaten it, and collected some vegetable seeds when he saw it by the canal and river in Amsterdam. Watercress is aquatic wild vegetable, which can also be planted in swamps and land, but the land needs to be watered frequently. It is a good yield green vegetable, and it is more suitable to be planted on both sides of the ditch of the Muskney River. Hagrid and others used to be extravagant when they wanted to eat vegetables. It was because the population was limited and there was no time and energy to grow vegetables, but now that the number of people is large, they can use more vegetables besides food to supplement and enrich everyone's table. Therefore, not only the white slaves under Olaf were growing vegetables, but the other 6 white slaves in Adon were also managing farmland, cutting wood and quarrying, and they also planted vegetables next to the stream wetlands, especially those from Yaluji. Adon is the most active, almost copying the work of Olaf's white slaves, planting various vegetables on both sides of the upper reaches of the Muskney River. And Yaluji also applied to Olaf in advance, and plans to plant a batch of potatoes and sweet potatoes planted in Olaf after they are produced, and try to plant a batch next year. Piku felt that although the owner Olaf was only the owner of Adon, he could still influence and even order Yaluji. If he wanted to, he might already be the owner of 2 Adons. When Olaf led the white slaves to engage in agriculture, Heir, and Hagrid already felt that they were trained well enough to attack the savage tribes in the hinterland of Wenland. On the morning and afternoon of July 10th, Heir, feeling well prepared, held 2 meetings of Viking raiders as all leaders in the castle. In the first meeting, there were only 6 stewards and 7 paddle heads, a total of 11 people, Hyena and Hoskard's dual identities. The meeting unanimously approved the militia to attack the hinterland of Wenland, destroy the savages, rob the savages, and take prisoners. The strategic plan of the savage slave. The city of Herat is hundreds of miles away from the hinterland of Wenland, and long-distance expeditions cannot be done by militia. The 110 militias in Herat City are combat units. To enter the hinterland of Wenland, you need to be equipped with a lot of white slaves and carriages to provide food and grass for the militia and help carry equipment and food. The real war is not a game, just a mouse click. The preparation work is very complicated, and long after discussion, Heir finally decided to mobilize the food, dried cod, bacon, etc. stored in the cave warehouse as expeditionary food, and at the same time expropriate half of the large livestock in the city of Grote to transport grain, grass and weapons. 20 male white slaves in each of the 7 Adons served as the militiamen of the expeditionary army to serve the militiamen. At the same time, they sought out 2 savage slaves who were loyal to them as guides and translators. From the manager to the oars, the capital approves of Heir's decision, and then the afternoon meeting called the production team captains and conducted pre-war mobilization. By Nu came to Wenland because he couldn't live in his hometown, So he ran out at the risk of death. Although he didn't like war, he didn't resist, especially the two conditions mentioned by Hader made it impossible for the white slaves to refuse. The first is that the people who participated in the expedition can reduce the contract time of 3 months, which means that the white slave status can be shortened by 3 months and can become earlier. Free people. The second is that if a white slave kills a savage warrior in a war, he can gain military merit. With a nose as evidence, a savage nose can shorten the slave time by 1 year. That is to say, if a white slave can kill 6 savage warriors, you can get the status of a free citizen on the spot. Land and freedom. The conditions of the leader of Hader are so good that people cannot refuse, but there are also requirements, that is, no one can escape in the war, and all escaped personnel will be exiled or even hanged. When the male white slaves sold their bodies to buy the tickets and decided to come to West India, their life and death were ignored. Therefore, after hearing Hader's words, almost no white slave production team leader hesitated. Everyone excitedly expressed their willingness to lead their team to join Expedition Hader. Hudic and Hagrid were very pleased with the performance of Captain White slaves. After discussing it, Hudic selected the white slaves that night, and finally selected the 10 strongest men in each production team. These are basically the team leaders, and then led by a captain. Joined the expeditionary force and became a member of the logistics force. The original production team was re-promoted by their respective warheads as acting captain and squad captain, and continued to work in the city of Grote at the same time. In order to protect the safety of Grote, Hader ordered Kadir to be the captain of the city defense militia and manage 10 white slave militias to guard the safety of Grote. If you are attacked by wild men, you can also mobilize the 7 great Addons to assist in the fight. At noon on July 11th, led by the 3 chiefs of Hader, Hagrid, and Hudic, 110 militiamen and 140 white slaves brought 12 carriages, 4 ox carts and 2 wild men. The slaves set off. This Viking militia brought the ardent expectation of more than 700 fathers, wives and children in Herat city, and ordered them to leave the Musk Ox Valley with dignity and march towards the vast hinterland of Woodland Island in the northeast. Almost all the Icelandic musketeers and white slave spearmen, and even most of the white slaves, are lighthearted about the upcoming war. Reading www.uucanchu.com told them because of more than 8 years of large and small battles, the same is true. The number of savages is nothing in front of the white people. What's more, the current militia team still has 30 matchlocks and more than 100 sets of advanced equipment, and it is really easy to deal with the small primitive savages unanimously. The various arms of the Viking militia on the marching road thought of the teachings of their wives or relatives and friends before the trip. Do it hard. Grant more, in the current era, not to mention the rabble of militias, even the best mercenary regiments in the German region play the role of bandits in the war, sometimes not only to rob the people of the enemy country, but also the people of friends and their own countries. Scope to be robbed. Soldiers and bandits are a characteristic of the military system maintained by both the West and the East. The improvement of this situation is still through the future war. Modern warfare has prompted the emergence of modern professional soldiers and improved the quality of soldiers. Therefore, neither Hader nor Hudic will stop the idea of robbery by their subordinates, and even encourage them, because they are fighting a big fight, and robbery is a benefit. Isn't the crusade a holy war of robbery from top to bottom in the East? Fighting is a robbery in Europa. It has a long history. Even in the 21st century, isn't that beautiful country still the same logic? Please remember the domain name of the book's first publication. The fastest mobile version update URL. Chapter 70, Destroy. Since the 17th century, the Earth has entered the development period of the Little Ice Age. The weather is getting colder and Wendland's latitude is higher. However, due to the Caribbean warm current, the temperature change is not too great, but Wendland in July still wears a linen shirt and trousers, and even adds a thin robe at night. Bedino Wilderness in the east of Wendland is a wetland forest. It is off the beaten track, but the environment is simple, and there are many beasts such as black bears and white wolves. But today's wilderness is very quiet, and a beast has not appeared, because on the grass in front of the wilderness, there is a group of soldiers rushing eastward in uniform steps. The leader is 3 men riding horses. All 3 are tall, but the tallest are 2 brawny men with a brown beard and white beard. The 2 men have thick eyebrows, big eyes, and similar facial features. They look like brothers. Dull and Hagrid. Hudic, wearing leather armor, rode ahead on horseback, scanning the corners in front of him like a radar, looking for any creatures that might appear, including savages. The 3 were wearing leather armor, a longsword and a big axe, and a short spear hung from the saddle. Behind them were the Icelandic musketeers with arquebuses and the white slave spearmen with spears. 110 militiamen stood in phalanx and marched in an orderly and fast manner. Behind them, white slaves guarded 16 vehicles that escorted armed food and followed closely. There were also 2 young Indian slaves mixed in with them. They were chosen by Jot. 2 very timid and well-behaved slaves, one named Hishi and the other named Amu, were perfect guides and translators. The Indians said this prairie forest is called Bedino, and the area is so big, Hagrid exclaimed, pointing to the endless wilderness on the right. After Amu and Blackstone's confession, Hagrid, Hader and others have known that the Bedino wilderness is the hinterland of Vinland Island. According to the Indians' words, there are 2 fertile land on the Oxhorn Peninsula. There are countless large and small lakes, as well as the tall Changling Mountains. The east is home to 2 large Indian tribes, and there are many Akismo tribes in the north. There are fewer Akismas than Indians on Vinland Island, and there are no large tribes, so they are not among the targets of this expedition. The strategic purpose of Hader and others in this expedition is to conquer and eliminate all the large savages in the hinterland of Wenland, and then kill all chief priests and samurai, and turn the remaining Indian savages into slaves in the city of Herod. In fact, according to the natives of Vinland, they are not called Indians, but Beducks. In the last century, British fishermen actually dried cod on Vinland Island and caught Beduck at the same time. The Croats were slaves or simply killed them to get the fur collected by the Beducks hunting. 100 years of struggle made the Beduck and Akismo hide in the hinterland of the island, and fear and hate the white Europa until 8 years ago, after Hagrid led more than 100 people to land on Wenland and swore his sovereignty. The fishermen did not dare to provoke Hagrid with guns and men. They stopped fishing on the island every spring and summer, but the Beduck people, the Akismo, still failed to escape the fate of being captured as a slave. In a few years, there was no trace of a savage on the Bullhorn Peninsula. Went through the wilderness and headed west for a day. The next morning, he ran into a river. The white slaves cut down trees to make sampans, and then the Viking militiamen crossed the river for the first time. I walked more than 20 miles in half a day, and passed 3 large and small rivers. The big rivers cut wood to make boats, and the small rivers and streams waded directly past, turning over a hill that is not too steep. Hagrid saw a huge lake in the distance, and the woods next to the lake were full of smoke. There is a tribe of Indians. Hearing Hagrid's call, both Hader and Hudic looked forward, and their faces flooded with joy. After walking for a week, I finally found this savage tribe. Hader straightened his waist and twisted to the hundreds of subordinates behind him and said loudly, "Guys, not far ahead is the savage tribe. Everyone, go hurry up and try to clean up in the afternoon. The village ends the fighting, and if everything goes well, we can sleep well in the village at night." Hearing Hader's words, everyone's spirits lifted, and it seems that the exhaustion has disappeared a lot, and the pace has accelerated a little. The team approached the forest where the Beducks lived 2 hours later. Hader waved his hand to stop the team, and then ordered the plate armor on the carriage to be removed. When the 3 chiefs of Hader, Hagrid, Hudic and 110 soldiers had all put on their full-body plate armor, and the musketeers who had successfully loaded their ammunition, Hader smiled slightly and waved his hand. In a group of people entered the woods and walked towards the primitive tribe beside the lake not far away, accompanied by a drumbeat by a white slave spearman. A phalanx of 110 people walked through the woods and walked in front of the fenced camp. At this time, the Indians in the tribe had already discovered the enemy attack, and organized hundreds of brawny men with naked upper bodies and red paint on their faces, holding wooden sticks inlaid with stones, carrying bow and arrow monsters and rushing out of the camp. Hudic could see clearly through the gaps in the visor that this camp is not small. Only half of the more than 100 warriors are young men wearing feather hats, and the rest are old and young. The war between primitive tribes has no strategy and rules, it is melee. Although the war masters of this tribe are wondering why the white enemies who come, there are a lot of people wearing strange armor and walking slowly in a group, but they are not afraid. Not long after they rushed out, the 40 or 50 most brave warriors were one step ahead and rushed to the front of the Viking phalanx. 120 steps got closer and felt that the spike arrow was able to exert its maximum power. The Indian warriors began to take off their bodies to get their bows and arrows, and shot the spike arrows with snake venom at the phalanx soldiers. As a result, only 70 or 80 arrows hit the spearmen and musketeers with a crackle, but they were all blocked by the plate armor. Only a clinking sound made the arrows cracked and fell, and even a dimple on the plate armor did not appear. Shot an arrow but failed to make merit. The savage warriors all made strange screams, danced a few strange dance steps, and then speeded up and rushed over. Matchlock guns have now developed to the pinnacle of maturity, with a maximum range of more than 250 steps, but the most powerful and accurate distance is still within 150 steps. After 200 steps, there is almost no accuracy. Hewdic, as the direct commander of this army, didn't need to ask Heir to enter the battle, let alone hesitating. His eyes narrowed, his big hand clenched a red flag and slammed down. The white slave soldier hit the drum and stopped, and the phalanx stopped immediately. The spearmen in the front row and on both sides opened to the sides, revealing the 30 Icelandic musketeers in the middle. The captain of the Icelandic musketeers yelled and fired. The 15 people in the first row knelt down and raised their guns to aim and fire. The second row of musketeers stood and raised their guns, and fired bullets forward as well. www.wooksiaspit.com/. The two musketeers fired 30 rounds of bullets at the same time. Although they hit hard again, because the distance was close and the Bedak warriors rushed densely, after this round of volleys, the gunpowder dissipated. The other side also fell down in nearly 20 people. 40 or 50 elite warriors were brought down halfway before they got close. This situation frightened the Bedaks, except for the more than 20 red-faced samurai who were about to rush in front of him. The rest of the ordinary samurai slowed down. The distance of 100 paces was too late to load and ignite the muskets, so the musketeers neatly carried the muskets behind their backs after a round of volleys, and then picked up the short spears and large axes for melee combat. The flag in Hewdic's hand changed, the drummer's drumbeat changed, and the captain of the 4 spearmen led his spearmen back to their original positions to form a square formation. The drum beats quickly and slowly. The phalanx slowly and firmly ran into the more than 20 savages who charged in front of him. These skilled hunters and warriors were swinging the big sticks in their hands and were about to smash them down at the enemy in front of them. 5 or 6 spears were pierced from all angles at the same time. Even the bravest Bedak fighters had only time to pull one away. A spear was immediately pierced into Hedgehog, and his body was covered with blood and fell to death in the eyes of the 50 warriors who followed closely behind. Their most proud and powerful warrior was killed as soon as they contacted the enemy. Even the most powerful Osma leader could not kill the opponent and was stabbed alone. Become a blood guard. You must know that these elite warriors are the strongest ones who can fight against beasts like black bears and white wolves. If it hadn't happened to them, the Bedaks could not believe that the warriors of the clan would be killed so easily. Chapter 71, Conquer. The battle between the 110 phalanx warriors and the Bedak warriors ended in less than half an hour. The Bedak soldiers were first shot by Icelandic musketeers and killed more than 20 people. Then the white slave spearmen stabbed more than 20 people to death. The remaining 50 soldiers saw that their bows and arrows did not cause any harm to the enemy. More than 20 powerful warriors turned out to be like rabbits in the mouth of a leopard. They were killed without even having a chance to fight back, and they were all frightened in an instant. Watching the huge square crowd wearing strange armor, holding sharp strange weapons, they kept approaching. The remaining Bedak soldiers screamed and screamed, then turned and ran back to the camp. Heir waved his hand to call the 2 Indian slaves Blackstone and Amu to the front, looked down from the horseback, and asked, "What did those savage warriors call, respected master?" "Those ignorant savages see that your army is brave and powerful, and the fire and white smoke of the musket can kill people 100 steps away, and they will regard you as a demon who has mastered the power of the thunder, lightning, and fire. Evil gods, they are shouting that the sky fire must not smash them, and then they will take the people to flee." Amu respectfully said something in Icelandic. Icelandic is an ancient Scandinavian language. It is the ancestor of Danish, Norwegian, and even Swedish. Of course, because it is too old, the words are simple and easier to learn. The white slaves of Herat City are actively learning Icelandic, and many of them already know how to speak Icelandic. Among the savage slaves, many of them are flexible-minded and actively learn. Blackstone and Amu are among the best. Hewdic is an officer with extremely high military quality. He heard Amu's words and instantly thought of a way to disintegrate the enemy's morale and weaken the resistance. Amu and Blackstone, you follow the phalanx and rush forward. After entering the tribe, you immediately shouted that the who controls the sky fire came to the world and punishes the wicked who do not respect the gods. If you surrender with your hands, you will not be judged. Hewdic's words made Hagrid and Heir shine at the same time. Hewdic, you are a great way. After the 2 savage slaves agreed, they quickly overtook the phalanx army that had broken the fence and rushed into the camp. After entering the tribe, musketeers and spearmen began to hunt in groups of soldiers and adult men hiding in the thatched huts. Many Bedaks who brought their families and prepared to escape from other places were chased and killed. Then the teenagers and women who dared to resist were also killed, and the remaining women, Teenagers, children, and old people were robbed as captive slaves. The Beothuk's camp has a radius of hundreds of earls, the traditional Icelandic unit of measurement. 1 earl is 12 meters, 40 to 50 grass houses, and a population of 500 people. It is the largest tribe on Vinland Island. The Beothuk people live next to the water. They call this land and related lakes the land of galaxies. It is stable and prosperous, strong and prosperous, and a stable life has been going on for hundreds of years, but here one day was suddenly broken by a white man wearing armor stronger than a stone. The arrival of the white people in the southeast peninsula did not bring friendship, but brought death and terror. The warriors of this powerful tribe, who ruled the Star River, were instantly killed by the white fire manipulated by white magic, and then hundreds of white people rushed into the tribe, slaughtered the tribe's warriors, priests and adult men, and snatched the fur in every room. The culture of the Indians is very primitive. There is no metal, no currency, gems, etc. The only treasures are the animal skins used to make clothing and bedding. The cries of the Indians lasted for more than 2 hours before it ended. When everything was a foregone conclusion, Heir, Hagrid, and Huduk gathered 110 soldiers and 140 white slaves and soldiers. 2 savage slaves, due to the connivance of the 3 of Heir, the 252 Herit militiamen, attacked the tribe and began to murder and looting. At the beginning, some warriors and men tried to resist, but they encountered white slaves and Icelanders wearing plate armor and holding sharp blades. Primitives who were naked and holding wooden clubs were not opponents at all. They would be killed when they touched. Even if it hits a white soldier, it can't cause any harm. Waiting for the militia masters to wreak havoc in the tribe for a long time, the white slave soldiers rushed and, gearing up, it plundered the militia masters to grab the remaining things. Harut City Militia received Huduk's professional training on mercenaries, and its quality represented the quality of soldiers of the same age. The Icelandic musketeers performed better because of their small numbers and families. They just killed the men and women who resisted, and then captured all those who did not dare to resist as prisoners, and at the same time scoured the fur in each room. Because the white slave soldiers had just arrived in Vinland and their low status, they didn't dare to behave too much. They only dared to catch some old and weak, and grab some shabby deer skins that the militia masters looked down upon. But the performance of the white slave spearmen is quite different. These people have basically lived in Vinland for more than 3 years, the longest is even 8 years, and more than 80% of them have not gotten a family. They are at a young age, and they have seen the Aways with beautiful eyes. At this time, the war and the killing and robbery aroused their animalism, and many people took Indian women to vent their animalism in the thatched house. When the 3 chiefs of Heir, Hagrid, and Huduk ordered the white slaves to beat the drums and summoned the militia and auxiliary soldiers together, the militia auxiliary soldiers scattered in the houses in every corner of the tribe appeared in the center of the tribe with the furs and captives they found. In the clearing, when everyone took the captives to stand in line, www.wooksiaspit.com, Heir looked at the noisy crowd in front of them. Their expressions changed. Huduk and Hagrid also frowned, because they both found more than 24 disheveled clothes. It was obviously the white slave spearmen who had just done a good job, and among the Indian captives behind them with their hands tied, there were also women or girls with disheveled clothes and fearful faces. "You stand up for me." Huduk's face was pale, and his voice was as cold as the snow-capped mountains of the Arctic Ocean. The disheveled white slave spearmen walked out tremblingly. Huduk rudder. "Do you, what order?" After the organizational reform in the city of Herat, the militias were also reformed in accordance with Viking thunder, except that the large and small production teams were changed to large teams. There were also adding paddle heads and manjafenro heads. Huduk managed 110, the paddle heads of the militiamen and the rudder heads of the entire 252 Viking army, including the auxiliary soldiers. Looking at the panicked white slave spearmen in front of him, Huduk drew his whip from his waist and lashed over his head and covered his face, yelling, "Bastard! Son of a bitch! You bastards! Have you raped Indian women? Dogs? Mothers? Don't you want to die? You don't want to live and you can't harm people." Huduk's whip was merciless, and the dozens of people who beat him rolled on the floor, begging for mercy, and scared the more than 30 white slave spearmen standing in the crowd who had just refreshed their faces. Trembling, Huduk kept fighting harder and harder until more than 24 people stopped struggling, and he stood still, panting heavily, retracting his whip, skinning around, and cursing, "You must control your waist belt in the future. What if someone else rapes an Indian woman? If I find out, they will be expelled from Vinland and let you die on the wasteland of West India." Huduk's tone was gloomy, and more than 200 people were shocked after hearing it, fighting the Cold War to make themselves stand straighter. Chapter 72, Slave. Heir and Hagrid saw that Hewdic had finally shocked the soldiers with violent means, and they breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts and no longer felt nervous. Actually, Heir, Hewdic, and Hagrid are not the kind of noble saints, nor are they high-quality leaders who do not occupy the masses, let alone the idea and ability to build an army that does not disturb the people and does not rob. The reason why the three of them could not accept the of Indian women by the white slave spearmen, and Thunder was furious, was actually because they were worried that their soldiers would contract syphilis, which would eventually kill most of them after Columbus discovered the New World and returned to Europa. A large number of diseases similar to leprosy but seem more terrible began to appear in Spain, France and other places. This terrible virus is transmitted through sexual behavior and has a terrible mortality rate. Even if the patient does not die, it will be extraordinarily painful. So peoples of the terrible disease called syphilis brought back from the Americas by Columbus is second only to the Black Death. In fact, later studies have shown that whether syphilis was really brought back to Europe by Columbus from the American continent is still to be questioned. However, the fact that Indians were carrying syphilis was indeed verified from the examination of bones. Heir, Hewdic, and Hagrid didn't understand what syphilis was, and they didn't understand whether syphilis was actually on the Indians, but they absolutely did not dare to try, and they were even more unwilling to use their lives to test whether the rumors were accurate. Hewdic severely punished more than 20 white slaves who had raped Indian women in front of everyone, in order to remind them not to touch Indian women, so as not to contract syphilis and ruin their life, and also infect everyone. Risk after Hewdic's severe punishment of the white slaves, the enthusiasm and joy of victory of the Viking army were diluted and suppressed. Heir also expressed support for Hewdic, and finally ordered that the spoils, captives, military exploits, etc., obtained by each of Iceland belong to their own. Half of the spoils and captives of the white slaves can also become private property. If you don't want it, you can return to the country. After Root City turned over the offset contract time, this was Heir's reward for the heroic fighting of the white slaves. After speaking about the decision, the white slaves all cheered because the white slaves are not admitted to have private property before the end of the contract. The contract owner can deprive the white slaves of all their wealth if they are strict in the same way. The wealth that a white slave grabs from fighting with his master must also be turned over to the master. But having said that, if you really do this, you will completely offend the white slaves. Leaving all of them to the white slaves will also make them self-inflated. Heir seems to have really explored the leadership experience and showed the generosity of the benevolent leader in a timely manner without thinking. Let the white slaves get half of the wealth gained from plunder. The white slaves were happy and grateful to Heir, and at the same time felt that they deserved it, and felt honored. This premise was also because the white slaves were able to grab something, or because the militia was strong, and the militia was strong. The strength is due to the long-range fire suppression of 30 musketeers and the close protection of 110 pairs of plate armor. This result is entirely due to the leader of Heir. Heir glanced at the darker and darker sky, and ordered the life to cook, and then led the people to finish the meal and arrange for the night. More than 200 people were divided into 3 shifts and slept in several big houses in the core of the tribe one by one. In order to prevent the slaves from escaping, the white slaves tied all the slaves together with ropes, and then they were guarded by dozens of soldiers on duty at night. By the next morning, Heir and others woke up, feeling sore all over, and the strange environment was accompanied by the dead. They slept very uncomfortably and just wanted to leave as soon as possible. So Heir ordered the destruction of this savage tribe, and then led the captives and the spoils back to the city of Heir. When the sky was faintly bright, the city walled by the water had been ignited by a fire. Last night, hundreds of corpses in the tribe had been thrown into the lake by the white slaves, and the flames grew higher and higher. It illuminates the blood-stained land, and the air is full of a strong and pungent smell of blood. However, as the grass house is ignited in large quantities, black smoke diffuses to obscure the smell of blood, and the flames in the black smoke are getting bigger and bigger. Illuminated the bright sky when the fire was blazing and the black smoke was rolling, Heir had led more than 250 militiamen and 380 Beduc slaves to leave the lake and forest with dead bodies on their way back. On the way back, there were nearly 400 Indian savages, so the speed was much slower. It was not that the Indians were not walking fast, but the Heir army used rope chains to tie up a large number of savages in order to save energy to prevent the Indian captives from escaping. As a result, they cannot move fast. It took a week for the Viking legion to depart from the city of Heir and arrive at the Beduc tribe, and 1/3 of the food in the car was lost. The remaining food could not support the return of a huge team of more than 600 people to Herat city, but in addition to the fur, The Indian tribe also found thousands of pounds of corn, cowpea beans, pumpkin seeds, corn, cowpea, and pumpkin seeds. They can also eat them, and Hayter ordered the white slaves to bring all these grains, enough for more than 600 people on the road to eat. Now is the season of crop growth, so the savage tribes have leftover rations. If you wait for more than a month, it will be the harvest season. By then, corn, cowpea, and pumpkins will all be harvested. Wetlands latitude is too north, so the climate is not suitable for the cultivation of most agricultural crops, especially the northern part is close to the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Ocean's cold current is severely affected. Except for the hardest rye, almost no crops can be grown. www.uxiaspit.com. The climate in the southern part of Wetland is much warmer and humid because of the Caribbean warm current, so it is basically close to the Heilongjiang climate in the Far Eastern Dynasty, and there are more varieties of crops that can be planted from spring to autumn. The Beothuk people on Vinland Island are actually not good at planting. Most of them rely on hunting, fishing and picking gifts from nature. Later, they established close ties with the tribes of the western continent before they got pumpkins, corn, and cowpeas. The three sisters planted them. These three sisters need to be matched and planted in the Indians' planting experience, interdependent, and then they will have a good harvest. The Indians do not understand the scientific principles and are purely empirical explorations. The leaders and warriors of the Beothuk people were killed by the white slaves. Even the adult males were mostly dead. The remaining men, women, old and young were shocked and became docile and obedient. In order to better manage them, Hayter temporarily asked the two Indian young men, Blackstone and Amu, to manage nearly 400 Beothuk slaves. Their language and culture were the same, which showed their benefits in less than a day. Hayter's orders to the Beothuks can be responded to and executed immediately, which makes Hayter's favor for the two young slaves, Blackstone and Amu, grow day by day. It was already the afternoon of July 31st when Hayter led more than 600 soldiers and prisoners back to the city of Growth. Hayter's western expedition in the summer of 1628 in the Julian calendar took 20 days and finally achieved a successful victory. There were no casualties among the 252 militiamen and auxiliary soldiers. 149 Beothuks were killed and 380 men, women, young and old were captured. As soon as this record was announced in Herat city, everyone cheered, and Hayter's prestige increased. Chapter 73, Distribution of Slaves. Beginning in August 1628, the population of Herat city reached more than 1,300, and the number of white slaves and Indian slaves was nearly equal. Hayter returned to the city of Herat and began to honor and reward his Viking army members. Each of the Icelandic musketeers received a man and a woman, 2 Beothuks as slaves, and a bounty of 100 silver coins. As for the white slave spearmen, they received a half-year contract time exemption and a material reward of 20 silver marks. White slaves, except for some Indian warriors, have reduced the extra contract time. Most of them have subtracted 3 months of contract time and received 5 to 10 silver marks as reward, since the white slaves had to hand in half of the leather goods and slaves, and most of the white slaves handed in the remaining half of the savage slaves to offset the contract time. Hayter got nearly 300 Indian slaves and used 60 people as Icelandic muskets. There are more than 200 people left in the hands of the soldiers. Reward. Hayter gave an average of more than 200 savage slaves to his 7 Aden masters, and the 7 oarsmen received an average of more than 30 savage slaves per person. However, because the Vikings conquered the Beothuk tribe, killed more than half of adult males, so the savages obtained were mostly females and teenage boys and girls. Olaf and Olav are the sons of the leader, and the 4 of Hoskard, Hyna, Karhu, and Karm will not compete with them for slaves, so they can be the first to choose. Olaf randomly selected 36 or 7 of them. Among them, there were only 2 adult males, 20 adult females, and the remaining 15 were all children. Olaf ordered Piku to manage 37 slaves, and allocated a piece of land outside the city for them to build their own houses. The savage slaves of the original Wetland did not submit to discipline, and spent a long time working out and fleeing at night, but the entire eastern part of Vinland Island was basically the sphere of influence of the city of Herat. The savage tribes also belonged to the relationship of rivalry, and there was no tribe to rely on. The savages basically did not end well in the wild. Either they were buried in the belly of the beasts, or they were captured by the white slave militia to be tortured and beaten. In addition, in recent years, many people have been crushed and killed by diseases and heavy lives, so that the original 200 savage slaves are behaved and numb. Seeing the performance of the same kind of slaves, this made the 7 Orsets, Icelanders, and the 380 slaves under the white slaves dare not give birth to the thoughts of fleeing, especially the women and children have long been scared. Dare become well managed. The population of Herat city increased by 380 as a result of the western expedition. The number of white slaves and savage slaves were close to the same, although the number of savage slaves only increased by less than 100 adult males and more than 100 women and girls, but the team of slaves has indeed grown, and the construction of Herat city has also accelerated by 20%. An easy conquest made Heir, Hudic, Hagrid, and others have a lot of confidence. Kadir, who had been in the city for 20 days, also yelled and led the soldiers to take the barbaric prisoners, and according to the captives' hinterland savage slave confession, Heir and others also found out the reality of the savages in the hinterland of Wenland, and their confidence doubled. It originally came from the fact that the French discovered that Wenland waters were a big fishing ground more than 100 years ago, so they would land on Wenland Island to rest and dry the fish. At the beginning, the intersection with the Beatles only used small items on the boat, such as knives, fire sickles, mirrors, glass balls, etc. were exchanged for the fur in the hands of the Beatles. Later, it was discovered that the Beatles did not have large tribes and aggressiveness, so they began to capture the Beatles as slaves, and sometimes they would kill they. The Beatak people on the coast were attacked by French fishermen and could only escape into the mountains in a hurry. Then, due to contact with white people, they infected the white people with viruses, such as smallpox, flu, etc., which soon caused heavy casualties to the wild people on Vinland Island. 100 years of time has slowly reduced the number of savages in Vinland Island from the original tens of thousands of people, and several powerful tribal alliances have also died out. 8 years ago, when Hagrid arrived in Wenland, it was when the Wenland savages recovered slightly. As a result, the savages on the southeast Nujao Peninsula were still captured as slaves, so that the remaining people fled to the hinterland. Through the savages, Heir and others learned that several powerful large tribal alliances with thousands of people in the hinterland had collapsed and disappeared due to decades of disease, resulting in only one alliance that seems to exist at present. Knowing the limited resistance of the savages, Heir and the others slapped their heads and decided to split their troops into the hinterland of Wenland, sweeping from the east to the west as a whole, destroying all the savages, large and small tribes, and capturing the savage slaves until they swept the whole Vinland, unified the island and enslaved all the wild people. If all goes well, maybe we will be able to rule the entire Wenland before this winter. Heir waved his hand at the pre-war meeting organized in the castle and said vigorously after the meeting, Hudic began to reselect males from the Icelanders and white slaves to enrich the team, preparing to expand the number of soldiers by a 10 because there were more than 300 slaves in the city of Groot. Among them there were more than 200 strong laborers. This greatly reduced the pressure on Icelanders and white slaves, and liberated the productivity of many Icelanders and white slaves. Hudic relaxed some conditions this time, and finally selected 30 Icelandic men aged between 18 and 50 years old and 90 male white slaves aged between 20 and 40 years old, and then began to intensify training. After half a month of training, some basic Icelandic men can play well with the arquebus in their hands. Although the marksmanship is a little farther away than the old musketeers of another team, Hudic is satisfied overall. UU reading www.uucanchu.com. The white slave spearmen have also been trained to look like they can do orders and prohibitions. Wearing plate armor is enough to sweep any Indian warrior in mid-August. Hudic and Heir discussed and mixed the two regiments in chaos, and then the veterans and recruits were dispersed to form two regiments. Then Heir, who was ready, ordered an expedition. The two regiments consisted of Heir and Hudic. Hagrid and Kadir, led by 4 people. Auxiliary soldiers are composed of the original 140 white slaves plus 140 savages slaves. Each of the 2 corps has a team of auxiliary soldiers carrying luggage and food. After Heir and Hagrid left Groot with a militia force, there were only more than 80 Icelandic women and children and more than 800 slaves left in the huge new city. It is Hoskard and Yacht who manage the entire city of Herat. The actual daily production and life and the construction of Herat city are still stable and led by 7 Adungs. Now the weather has entered the hottest. At that time, crops could no longer be planted, and people concentrated on logging, quarrying, fishing, and hunting, while women did logistical work such as boiling salt, pickling fish, curing meat, cooking rice, and sewing clothes. Although the city of Herat suddenly lost 500 males, there are still a large number of white slaves, savages and sturdy women who continue to sweat for the development of Herat. so whether it is Olaf or Hoth, Kurds feel that the city of Grote has not been affected in any way. There are still hundreds of pounds of food filling the warehouse every day, and thousands of pounds of wood and stone are transported to the square of Grote. There are only more than 20 horses and more than a dozen cows in the city of Heir. More than half of them were requisitioned this time. Fortunately, there is no farm work now, so the remaining dozen horses and 3 or 4 cows are enough to transport wood and stone. Chapter 74, Holding a musket is an Indian god. Was doing civil engineering in the city of Heir, and when the slaves were in full swing, Heir and Hagrid had led their Viking militias to leave the peninsula and entered the hinterland of Wenland. This time, both legions took the newly captured slaves. They didn't need to wear plate armor along the way through them. They only relied on the number of people and muskets to push dozens of small savage tribes horizontally. Said it was a savage tribe? In fact, it can only be said to be a few savage families, most of which are the places where the Kismis live together. There were a dozen to 20 people. They were killed by white slave pikemen and Icelandic musketeers. The strong man obediently lay down and surrendered, was led by the new savage captives, and soon the 2 legions were advancing to the northeast and southwest along the upper and lower coastlines of Wenland, kept destroying any savage tribes of any size that could be found along the way, killing brave and strong male savages, and capturing the remaining savages in less than 10 days. The team of Heir and Hudic on the north road doubled, and more than 100 Akismo and nearly 200 Bedak were added to the auxiliary army when it rained heavily at the end of August. Heir and others took the rein and went to the place named Waterfall Valley in the northern part of Vinland. At the end of the autumn of last year, there are also houses built before, which look very strong after a year, but the food that was previously planted has been ruined by animals, so Heir and others got into large and small longhouses to take shelter from the rain, and prepare to explore the big waterfall upstream of the southern river after the rain stopped. According to the captive savage, there was a huge tribe on the upstream waterfall. While Heir was sheltering from the rain, the south of Wenland was cloudless and the sun was shining brightly. The militiamen and the white slaves driving under the sun were sweating profusely. Hagrid and Kadir discussed an order to rest under the shade of the lake in front of them. The savage tribe that was wiped out last month is not far ahead. Hagrid pointed to the huge lake in front of him and said, "There is a place called the Land of the Galaxy by the savages. The water system is developed and the lakes are everywhere. It is said that there are hundreds of savage tribes in the depths, especially the Corbacans. There is one of the largest tribes by the Long Lake, with a co-owner of the Beothuk Alliance. The area of Vinland is about to be bigger than Iceland. The environment and climate here are better than Iceland. Will the total number of wild people exceed Iceland? If there are tens of thousands of people, we may not be able to conquer their big tribe. I haven't seen the Viking militia destroy the savages in person last month, so I am still a little worried about the huge savage tribe that I will face. Indian savages have no smelting technology. They only have wood, stones and animal bones as weapons. Our soldiers are immune to all damage when they wear plate armor. Musketeers are even more powerful." Hagrid wiped the sweat from his face with a silk handkerchief, feeling cool and comfortable, and then continued, "The Indian savage has never seen a musket. He heard the sound of the gun. When he saw the fire and white smoke, he thought it was a sky fire. Cheyenne, they are ignorant, and they will give up resistance in their hearts. Our weapons, equipment, and fighting qualities are thousands of times better than that of wild people. Even if they face 10 times the enemy, they will surely win easily. There are abundant species on Wenland Island, and savages can obtain sufficient food by hunting and gathering. Therefore, there is no condition for the formation of large tribes on the island. Generally, there are small tribes with a dozen to dozens of people living in a certain water system. Live a leisurely and contented life. But the arrival of Hagrid's army completely changed the life of the savages in southern Wenland. He searched for tribes, large and small, and then broke through the tribes, turning all the savages into slaves, and soon the team became huge. As the southern part of Wenland is far superior to the northern part of the environment and rich in products, there are basically no Akismas in the south. They were all driven by the Beoduks to the bitter cold land along the northern coast. Hagrid broke through a Beoduk city walled by a half-moon-shaped lake that night, and eventually killed more than 80 adult men and captured more than 100 men, women, teenagers and children living in the large wooden house of the original tribal priest-in-chief. Hagrid lit the oil lamp made of seal grease placed in the house, then sat down quietly and waited quietly while whispering to himself, "It's been almost half a month since I came out. Because of the sweeping savages like touching a carpet, the distance to walk is shorter than last month, but now there is no savage tribe in the back. but by new food there are more than 300 Indian savages under the soldiers and savages, and more of these people will have a great burden, and there are some unsafe factors. After a while Hagrid was thinking about it, Kadir walked in bloody, wearing a half-length plate armor, sat down and said with a grin, "That old thing has been shot to my head. It's for all the savages to see with their own eyes. Now, they all believe that I am the who masters the power of sky, fire and thunder and lightning." Hagrid laughed, thinking about what his second nephew Olaf told him when he wanted to leave. He didn't quite understand it at the time, but it became clearer and clearer now, so he said, "Okay. You kill them with your own hands. If the chiefs and priests of the gods are respected, the savages will question their gods, but at this time tell them that we are mortal gods, to deal with the liars, and then spread the right gods. They will definitely submit to us." Both Kadir and Hagrid are not good at scheming minds. After hearing Hagrid's words, he pondered for a while before he was surprised and stared at him and asked, "Hagrid, when did you receive the Lord's favor and the apocalypse?" Listening to what Behin and Hader said, reveal the taste of wisdom and knowledge slowly. In the city of growth www.wooksiaspit.com, the most intelligent person is recognized as Hannah Williams, and the most minded person is Hader. The bravest and strongest is Hagrid, the most outrageous it is Keldy, the most potential is Olav, and the most mysterious and invisible is Olaf. Kadir absolutely does not believe that Hagrid, who is as big and rough as himself, will suddenly become smart and cunning, unless he is drowned half dead by the fountain of wisdom. Hagrid spread his hands and sighed, "Why can't I think of smart means?" Feeling the strange look in Kadir's eyes, Hagrid laughed, "Okay. I admit that this is not what I thought of, Olaf. It was Olaf who quietly told me how to use the savages to control me before I left." Savage, that's right. As the deputy commander of a Viking militia, Kadir knew very well what his good friend, the old man Hagrid, was good. After hearing his words, he smiled and clapped his hands. Olaf's head, it is the treasure that has been soaked in the fountain of wisdom. He is definitely a genius. Using faith to subdue savages is much better than your original cruel method. The Vikings treated their enemies and slaves very cruelly and harshly. Even after they converted to the benevolent and kind Lord, they did not become very kind. Similarly, the Europa countries that believe in the almighty and loving Lord have not become gentle and polite gentlemen. They are still greedy, barbaric and willing to help people in the backward areas of the world to accept the advanced culture influence. In fact, if Hagrid's treatment of savage slaves is compared with the treatment of the local indigenous colonization by the East India Company in South Asia, the West India Company in Central and South America, and the West African colonists, Hagrid can definitely be called a benevolent master. Chapter 75, Great Falls. Between the mountains, there are valleys with birds and flowers. The gentle slopes and flat grounds are full of various plants. The most are plots where corn, cowpea, and pumpkin are cross-planted. The carob climbs up the corn stalks, and the root system produces fertilizer for the ground underneath. Pumpkin spreads and climbs on the ground between the corn, covering the soil underneath and preventing weed growth. The interdependence of the three sisters is the best planting pattern that the Indians have found in thousands of years of groping. These three foods ensure that the Indians will not be hungry even if they cannot catch prey, so that the huge North America will not be covered by ice and snow. There are Indian footprints in every corner covered. Although the Bedak people are fishing and hunting people, they are also influenced by the Quebec on the mainland and planted some foods such as the Three Sisters in the north of Woodland Island. At the northernmost end of the Star River, there are dozens of valleys, and each valley has a small tribe of dozens to hundreds of people. The large waterfall left from the Gillidan cliff tops Wendland. There is a city made of stone and wood beside the upper river course of the Great Falls, which is called Great Falls by the Beadaks and Akismas. Although most of them are simple wooden houses, in the middle is a tall stone temple. Surrounding the city is a stone wall as high as one person. This wall can resist the sneak attack by wild beasts and the Akismas. With the invasion of other tribes, the outer city walls and the temple in the middle made this big city-state look mysterious and primitive, with historical vicissitudes ever since the Beadaks of Vinland formed an alliance for hundreds of years. Great Falls has no war, but several terrible curses and diseases that have spread to Vinland 100 years ago have caused the Beadaks to suffer heavy casualties. Great Falls has also changed from the original leader of the alliance to member. The population has lost more than half. So far, it has only a population of 1,000. There are only 500 samurai. Compared with the current leader of the alliance, the Long Lake city of Bacon's Lake, its strength it's not as good as the power this morning. The chief and sacrificial priest Adipu of Great Falls was sitting in the temple praying for tomorrow's wolves hunt. The continuous heavy rain has been raining for 5 days, and it finally stopped last night, and various animals will be there. A large number of them will appear after today. It is a good time to hold a big hunt. The huge white wolves on Wetland Island are fierce and have no natural enemies, so they are numerous and can be found in every corner every year. Great Falls conducts wolf hunting in the 2 seasons with the most prey in summer and autumn, which means killing both prey and white wolves in the territory to reduce the harassment of Great Falls by white wolves in winter. Even if it is, there are many big hunts every year, and children in Great Falls are still bitten to death by white wolves. Atap is 50 years old this year, and he is already a long-lived elder for the Beatux. He has white temples, a rickety figure, and a crown of red feathers on his head. He is holding a crown full of engravings in his hand. The maple stick of calendar runes, with 3 golden beads, 2 obsidian beads, and a turquoise stone inlaid on the top. This is the great priest staff that has been passed down from generation to generation in Great Falls and has a history of hundreds of years. It represents the right to communicate with the gods. Atap, who had been chanting a word, was about to enter the special realm of understanding the instructions of the gods, but he suddenly had a pain in his heart. Then his heartbeat accelerated, and the magic staff in his hand almost fell. The high priest, standing solemnly by the side, were Adipu's heirs and other priests. Everyone was shocked to see the high priest's body faltering. A young man wearing a feather crown and painted colorful runes rushed out and hugged the high priest, slowly placing him on the straw mat. After a while, Adipu woke up leisurely, and found that except for his left hand and neck, he had lost consciousness in his body. Hey, after all, he was a well-informed high priest. Atap quickly stabilized his mind, and then slowly said, "Oris, help me sit up." The young man was full of concern, and the grandfather, who was about to blurt out, swallowed it again, and then furiously raised the high priest. Adipu knew that he was suffering from the ossification stroke that the elderly and the chief priests were prone to, and he also knew that he was about to return to the embrace of the goddess of sea and harvest of surest. I want to return to the embrace of the gods. This is the inspiration from the gods just now. After speaking, Adipu gasped for a long time, worrying the young man beside him, and the surrounding priests knelt down and listened. Even the atmosphere don't dare to breathe. I have lived for 50 years. I have kept the Great Falls inherited from my ancestors from curses and illnesses. 30 years ago, Great Falls had only more than 700 people, but now it has broken through 1,000 people. We are guided by the gods. I will return to glory. Now I, Adipu, as the high priest, pass the position of the leader of Great Falls to my grandson Oris, and he will inherit the position of high priest after I die. Adipu stopped the grandson's intention to help him to rest, and then looked at the priests in the temple decisively and said, until the priests all agreed. Just when Adipu was about to close his eyes, he suddenly heard a few loud noises coming from outside the temple. Papa, sky fire, Tianlei. The gods descend on power. Many thoughts in the hearts of the worshippers could not help blurting out. 10 thunderbolts in a row came from outside, and the hearts of the people in the temple were turbulent, and then there were noises and horrified screams coming in. At this time, Adipu was exhausted and fell asleep. His grandson, Oris, who had just taken over as the leader of Great Falls, stood up, and while instructing several priests to bring the old man to the bed in the back room for training, he waved his hand and brought the priest. We walk out of the temple. Uxiaspit. The gods come to the world, hold the thunder and fire, kneel down and worship. You can be blessed. Those who dare to resist the blasphemer will never be redeemed. Walking out of the temple, Oris and others saw the people in the city kneeling on the ground and shaking, and they were all heading towards the east gate. Outside the city looked east, but saw that the dozens of the most elite white wolf warriors on the wall were lying down and out, and there was a bright red pool under them. And many white wolf warriors and ordinary warriors also knelt down on the ground. Oris narrowed his eyes and frowned. Standing on the stone platform in front of the temple, he and the priests behind him saw a red sun floating in the eastern sky outside the city wall, and there were a large group of people on the land, wearing armor gleaming in the sun, holding a gleaming spear and walking towards Great Falls at the same pace. The people in the center of the shining team were holding long sticks in their hands, and some were still emitting white smoke. Squinted his eyes, Oris saw clearly that at the forefront of the group of people there were 2 people riding tall beasts, also wearing flash armor and holding strange weapons. Behind the 2 leaders who rode wild beasts were a few Beatux from other places, repeating the words they heard just now in Beatux with an oriental accent. God came to the world, with thunder and fire in your hand. Kneel down and worship. You will be blessed. Those who dare to resist a blasphemer will never be redeemed. How dare to claim to be a god? Horus reacted with anger in his heart and couldn't help shaking, because the team of flashing enemies that kept approaching in the distance was too terrifying and weird. Holding back the strangeness in his heart, Horus drew the bare bone knife from his waist and sternly said, "There are enemies who blaspheme the gods. The people of Great Falls, take up your weapons. Defend our powerful enemies." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.